Hello, and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your not-so-daily dose of the latest news, rumours, and speculation about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. The day is Tuesday, July 9th, and I'm your host, Harry. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Now, I know it's been a good few weeks since I brought you the last episode, where we discussed the first teaser trailer for Season 2. After that marathon of an episode, I needed a little break to recharge and await more news about the coming season. And boy did that news arrive. As we saw across June and into the start of this month, the marketing and promotional machine for the Rings of Power is in full swing. Today's episode is dedicated to covering all of these new insights. We've got new character reveals, one cast member exiting the show, and an in-depth feature in Empire magazine, along with a plethora of new images from Season 2. For those of you who followed all the news, you will know that we live in a new world. A world of blue jackets and yellow boots. A world of Hey-Doll, Merry-Doll, and yes, even a world of Ring-a-Dong-Dillo. In this new world, I knew I didn't have the courage to face all these revelations alone. And that's why you won't be surprised to hear that I'll be joined for today's discussion by my ever-reliable, if intermittent, co-host, Anna, my LSR. As you'll see from the runtime, this is another long-haul journey of an episode. So whether you're using this to distract you from work, or to give yourself a bit of company on a long road trip, I hope you enjoy this mega recap of all the latest Rings of Power news. However, as always, we cannot begin an episode without a reading from the Professor's work. Today, our reading comes from The Lord of the Rings, The Council of Elrond. The Barrow wights we know by many names, and of the old forest many tales have been told. All that now remains is but an outlier of its northern march. Time was when a squirrel could go from tree to tree from what is now the Shire to Dunland west of Isengard. In those lands I journeyed once, and many things wild and strange I knew. But I had forgotten Bombadil, if indeed this is still the same that walked the woods and hills long ago, and even then was older than the old. That was not then his name. Iarwain Ben-Adar we called him, oldest and fatherless. But many another name he has since been given by other folk. Fawn by the dwarves, Orald by northern men, and other names beside. He is a strange creature, but maybe I should have summoned him to our council. He would not have come, said Gandalf. Could we not still send messages to him and obtain his help? Asked Erestor. It seems that he has a power, even over the ring. No, I should not put it so, said Gandalf. Say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master. But he cannot alter the ring itself, nor break its power over others. And now he is withdrawn into a little land, within bounds that he has set, though none can see them, waiting perhaps for a change of days, and he will not step beyond them. But within those bounds nothing seems to dismay him, said Erestor. Would he not take the ring and keep it there, forever harmless? No, said Gandalf, not willingly. He might do so if all the free folk of the world begged him, but he would not understand the need. And if he were given the ring, he would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. He would be a most unsafe guardian, and that alone is answer enough. But in any case, said Glorfindel, to send the ring to him would only postpone the day of evil. He is far away. We could not now take it back to him, unguessed, unmarked by any spy. And even if we could, soon or late the Lord of the Rings would learn of its hiding place, and would bend all his power towards it. Could that power be defied by Bombadil alone? I think not. I think that in the end If all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first, and then night will come. It hardly needs an explanation why I chose this reading, given the announcement of my arch nemesis appearing in Season 2. But also, I do love an opportunity to torture you, my loyal listeners, with my substandard voice acting. So I hope you enjoyed that. And a quick final note before we begin. Anna and I recorded this episode on Sunday, blissfully unaware that Monday was going to see the release of a huge flurry of articles. Obviously, we didn't cover any of those articles in today's episode, given, well, our lack of access to a time machine. But I will be putting together another episode to recap those articles and any more news we get this week. Now, with that out the way, let's dive into our conversation with Anna. Well, without further ado, after a month and a half away from doing the podcast, but more importantly than just me being away, because while this may be the Daily Rings of Power podcast, and whilst many people think this podcast is actually the podcast of Harry, it's Harry's podcast. He is the main attraction. We are, of course, all wrong when we think that, because we know the main attraction for the Daily Rings of Power podcast is our one and only guest, Anna. And that's a new feature we're trying out where I add in sound effects. Anna, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Harry. And I know he just said that they were sound effects, but that was actually just Harry cheering because he's so happy to have me back on the show.
Well, it has been a while since you've been back, but we should say to the audience, actually, we have seen each other once since we last recorded our episode, because we went to go and see the Two Towers Extended Edition in cinema. So that was a thing that happened.
It was a thing that happened, and it was lots of fun. I mean, you can never really not have fun when you're watching The Lord of the Rings on the big screen, but it was nice to have a fellow nerd sat next to me while we watched it.
It was, and from my perspective, it was a deeply disturbing experience because I just felt there was something in the room that shifted every time Aragorn appeared on screen, and I felt uncomfortable for the people sitting around us, and it was difficult, but we got through it, and yeah.
And I did turn around to tell Harry that Viggo broke his toes, so no one panicked.
Yeah, which Harry I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, you had no idea.
Thankfully, I mean, it's not like one of us is old enough to have actually seen the films in cinema when they first came out, but that just I don't know why I'm bringing up the fact of how old I am. Not really off to a good start.
Yeah, you're not helping yourself there.
No. Right. Anyway, we're not going to mess about today because for those of you who listened to our last couple of episodes, we managed to do one that I think was just under 3 hours and one that was just under 4 hours. So our plan for today is not to get anywhere near that. We don't have a trailer to talk about. We don't have wild speculation to do. I mean, maybe a little bit. But the point of today's episode, as I will have said in the intro, is that since the trailer came out a month and a half ago now, we've had intermittently quite a bit of news. We've had interviews with some of the cast through publications. We've had character reveals, one particularly big bad one, depending on how you look at it. And most recently, as of a couple of days ago, we had our first proper magazine takeover where the Rings of Power took over Empire magazine, which is something they did for season 1 as well. So that was very exciting. So today we're going to cover all of that news. We're going to go chronologically. So we're going to cover everything from the Tom Bombadil reveal, which was the first major piece of news after the trailer. We're going to go through the Sam Hazeldine as Adar piece, and we're going to go through a couple of other pieces before we get to Empire. And the other thing we're going to be doing, for those of you on Twitter, you know that I solicited some questions from the community, from you guys. So I'm going to drop those in as we go. But before we get started diving into our first piece of news, we did actually get a question from the audience, which I think is a nice little scene setter to start us off. So, Anna, we had a question from King Arthur on Twitter. unlikely to be the one of Camelot, but there you go. So King Arthur said, please talk about the marketing strategy from a bird's eye point of view and compare it to season 1. And I think what this gets at, and I've seen a lot of people talk about this on Twitter, a lot of people have been saying, oh, haven't the marketing team really stepped it up for season 2? Haven't they done such a better job than season 1? Isn't it, they've listened to us and it's amazing. Anna, what do you think about that?
I think being on Twitter and in the Tolkien community when season 1 was coming out was a very nice experience. And like being there when all the news dropped was kind of crazy because it was the first time we were getting any of this content. And I still remember the day that the hand posters dropped, for the first season, when we got our first kind of proper glimpse at all the characters. And I thought that still to this day is probably the best piece of marketing they've done. It was just really kind of original. It really captured everyone. And I remember kind of everyone just being there discussing who they thought was who, kind of breaking down all the costumes. It was so good. And there's nothing that I feel like they've done this season that's really lived up to that so far. I think the season 2 trailer was a lot better than the season 1 teaser trailer, at least. From that perspective, they've really stepped things up. However, since then, they've kind of stayed with this same strategy of the magazine articles, which, fair enough, it's an easy way to get that information out. It's an easy way to get news out and give us new pictures and stuff. But when that's all you're giving us alongside, we discussed it before, the same few trailer clips just spliced together in different ways over and over again, it does begin to lose its momentum a little bit. And I think that less than 2 months before the show actually drops, they do need to be like ramping the marketing up a lot more, in my opinion. I know a lot of people think that that's going to be happening during and after the San Diego Comic-Con, so I guess it's just kind of fingers crossed and see how it goes. But in my opinion, the marketing is just kind of still as it was, very much to me, though I do wish they'd do something a bit more kind of discussion prompting. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I'm looking for from them.
I think one of the things we talked about in the off season, and maybe, I think we've talked about it kind of throughout our whole time doing this and being part of the community, is that I think Rings of Power, and I do understand why Amazon are like this because of the kind of negative backlash that the show got from, kind of rage bait YouTubers and quite a lot of, just to put it frankly, racists and trolls. And we've seen that with other media properties, like whether it's Star Wars or Marvel or whatever it might be. And I think that's made them hesitant to engage with the community. And I do understand why that is. They're trying to obviously protect their own staff who have to run these accounts, protect the actors. But at times it creates this distance. And I think that is an issue. But I also want to return to this idea of, and this isn't so much a critique of the season 2 marketing, but I think for me, it's more when people say, oh, it's so much better than season 1. I think people I'm not sure whether they're overly harsh in retrospect or they're just misremembering. Because to give you an idea of what the season 1 marketing timeline was like, so obviously the first thing we got in the year of release was, so we have to go back to the hands posters, as you said. Well, technically we got our title announcement first, which was January 2022, and we got the behind the scenes of the title, and then after that we got the hands posters. And I agree with you, Anna. I think one of the best marketing moves. It created discussion, speculation, excitement. I still am not quite sure why they haven't done any kind of character posters for season 2. They made a big deal of announcing, 20 cast members or whatever it was across the off season for season 2. And yet they've done relatively little to introduce them, which makes me think the majority of those characters are going to be side characters, but who know, obviously we're still in the dark, and that's why I'm saying that. So we got the hand posters in January of 2022, and then in February we basically got, and we haven't really had anything like this like that this year, we got a big in-depth preview with Vanity Fair, and Vanity Fair are very famous for doing these on-set deep dive reporting, and so we got that in February, and that was just a few days before the first teaser trailer. So a big difference between season 1 and season 2 was the first teaser trailer for season 1 was A, aligned with the Super Bowl, it was this huge thing, and B, it was, because of that, it was February, so it was 7 months before the show was going to come out. Obviously this time we got our trailer in May, So there's a big difference there already. It's 4 months versus 7 months. And then after that, the main difference was that you ended up with a break after the teaser trailer, where we got a couple of pictures of Bronwyn and Theo in April. In May, they invited Tolkien scholars and content creators to London to show them some footage, meet the showrunners. So that was more of an engagement with the community thing. And then, interestingly, the next thing they did was June. And what they did was they took over Empire magazines. Some of you may have the magazine, some of you may remember it. They did exactly what they've done this time. And then what they followed that up with was a bunch of character-focused pieces. So they did an article with Fandom interviewing Charles Edwards for Celebrimbor. They did one with Nerdist for Benjamin Walker Gil-galad. They did one around the orcs with IGN. So all I'm trying to say to people is it's not actually that different. You're feeling like they're much more engaged with the marketing this time, but that's because last time you had this huge wait from February till June. If for season 1 they'd done the initial teaser trailer in May, there would be no difference. Anyway, so that's just my little rant over. I think I largely agree with you, Anna. I think the marketing's fine. I think, as you said, the trailer was so much better than the season 1 teaser trailer that we are inclined to be more positive. But largely, they're sticking to what worked for season 1, or depending on your view, didn't work. The only thing that seems to be different is they don't seem to have done a big event with Tolkien scholars, influencers. But I think part of that is because the show it's just more established now, I guess.
Yeah. There's not much more we can say. I think there's more that they could be doing, but it is, as you said, probably the most controversial TV show that's airing right now. So it's hard to balance that with kind of positively interacting with the community of fans and also trying to kind of steer away the trolls because they're everywhere. You know, you can't avoid them. So I don't envy the person who has to run their social media accounts. You know, we get enough of it on ours, so I don't even know what it must be like on the main the main account.
No, and as you said, I think, we're a few weeks away from San Diego Comic-Con. They did a lot at Comic-Con last year. Obviously, for those who don't remember, we technically got 2 trailers before Comic-Con. We got sort of a teaser for a teaser, and then we got what they called a main teaser, which was their first kind of 2-minute something trailer. And then at Comic-Con, we got what I thought was, even though we got one more trailer just before the season aired, the San Diego Comic-Con trailer, I still think was their main piece. For me, it was their best one. It was the most impactful. And I think it was like 3 minutes long. It was a really heavy hitting piece of marketing. And along with that, they had, live orchestra, SDCC. They had all the cast there, the showrunners. So I don't know if they'll do anything as big this year because obviously first season versus second season, you're not going to put the same amount of investment in. But I suspect they'll do something. And so I imagine I'll be back recording an episode after San Diego Comic-Con if there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. And if we get a trailer, we'll definitely be back. So that's just our overall thoughts on the marketing, but that's not really what people are here for. But thank you for the question, King Arthur. I hope we've answered that one sufficiently. Now, Anna, our first piece of news we got, and listen, I think I'm probably going to hand this to you first because I don't think the audience necessarily wants me to just bring the mood down 10 minutes into the episode. But let's begin. On the 29th of May, Vanity Fair published an article revealing that Tom Bombadil would appear in Season 2 of The Rings of Power. Now, for those of you in the community who haven't avoided spoilers and leaks in the off-season, this had been something that had been rumoured for a while. We'd heard whisperings of it. Obviously, we hadn't had it confirmed, but multiple different people had said it was a possibility. And then in May, when I least expected it, they confirmed it. And those of you who were on Twitter may have seen my reaction. Maybe it was a tad over dramatic, something about rest in peace, Daily Rings of Power. Who can say? Who can remember such things? But Anna, take me back to that day when you got the notification on your phone from the Rings of Power account. How did it feel seeing that Jolly Tom was definitely going to be in Season 2?
Well, see, it's funny actually, because before I even saw that notification, I remember looking down at my phone, and the first thing that I saw actually was a text from you saying, "Don't check Twitter." So I was immediately like, oh my God, what's happened? And then the notification straight after that was from the Rings of Power account. So I click on that, and there he is. It's Tom Bombadil. And I couldn't quite believe it. Half of me was like, is this a prank? Has Harry somehow teamed up with the Rings of Power account to prank me? Because there's no way they're actually doing Tom Bombadil. But no, he was there in all of his blue-coated, yellow-booted glory, and I was the happiest person in the world for at least like the 5 minutes I was reading the article.
So really, it was a tale of two cities almost. Myself, I think as I said, I might have posted something about how we'd had a good run with the Daily Rings of Power Twitter account, and 2 years was a good time, and I think we'd had enough. As you say, I texted you that. Just as a behind the scenes for the listeners, I think I had at least 4 different people who I know through the community send me a text of one description or the other, kind of wishing me their condolences or just saying "rip bozo." It was a real varied day for me. How did I react to it? I think at first it was just this kind of, it was like having a bucket of cold water splashed over me. I just thought, part of me, after hearing all these leaks and rumors, had thought, just prepare yourself for it. Just go into this season, even if they don't reveal it in the marketing, just go into the season open to the possibility, so you don't get jump scared. It's like going into a horror film and just almost getting yourself ready to be scared. You don't want to be surprised. You're just like, it's going to happen. And that's how I felt about Tom Bombadil. However, and we'll obviously get into the content of the article and everything the showrunners and the actor said, I have to say the one thing that saved it for me was when I clicked on the article and saw that it was none other than Rory Kinnear playing Tom Bombadil. And there was this almost sigh of relief, and I thought, okay, if it had to be anyone, I'm really glad it was him.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the one thing at least we can agree on is that it's like brilliant casting. And what I think was really interesting about the interview that Rory does is that he's quite aware of the kind of controversy of Tom Bombadil. I mean, he talks about the fact that he didn't know who he was. And then he goes down to his partner to tell her that he got the role as Tom Bombadil, and she does know who Tom Bombadil is. And he ends it by saying, I think it's, I knew instantly then that it had a cultural heft that I was going to have to be very sensitive to. So I think straight away he's well aware of this kind of rift. There's this like divide. It's people who don't know that Tom Bombadil exists, people like Harry who despise him and wish he didn't exist, and people like me who love and adore Tom Bombadil. So I think he's very aware of that kind of the large audience he has to deliver this character to. And I think, as you said, if there's anyone who can do it, it's probably Rory Kinnear.
Yeah, and listen, listen, everyone, listen. I'm gonna do some mea culpaing here. I'm gonna put myself. I'm gonna be vulnerable. When the leak first came out during the off season that Tom Bombadil might appear, I think I tweeted something and someone will be able to find it, but I tweeted something to the effect of, I'm being deadly serious. If the Rings of Power showrunners have included Tom Bombadil in season 2, I think this is a massive mistake. And I said because I think, if anything from season 1, a lot of us felt was that we could have done with a bit more time devoted to some canon characters like Celebrimbor, Gil-galad, Pharazôn, whoever it might be. There was this feeling that the thing season 2 needed to is just refocus a little bit on some of those characters. And I just had this feeling of like, why are we doing this? Why are we possibly doing it? Now, we're going to get into talk about the article and what they've actually said about what his role is going to be. And I'll just say to start off, I am slightly reassured. I do think the showrunners have an idea of what they want to do with it. Now, let me say, I'm still not 100% convinced it's a good idea, but I'm willing to be open to it. So let me, for the audience who maybe, it's obviously been a month, over a month since the article came out, and you probably don't have it in front of you and probably don't remember exactly what it said. So let me just, I'll read out the kind of couple of opening quotes from the showrunners, and then Anna, I'll get your take on it. So, J.D. Payne, who's one of the showrunners, said, "We started thinking, what does he care about, and how can that be a doorway to drama? We know he cares about the natural world, and we know he is a helper. He's not going to push you, but he will help you. And so traditionally, he lives in this place called the Withywindle, which is sort of almost the Enchanted Forest. In our story, he has gone out to the lands of Rhûn, which we learn used to be sort of Edenic and green and beautiful, but now is sort of a dead wasteland. Tom has gone out there to see what's happened as he goes on his various wandering." And then we can talk about who he's going to bump into character-wise. I think it is very interesting, and here's where I'll start and hand it over to you, Anna. I think it's very interesting and actually quite encouraging that Tom's motivation for being where he is and ending up in the story is this idea of protecting the natural world. And I think that's a good sign that Tom Bombadil isn't going to come into Rings of Power and start drop-kicking bad guys and singing bad guys into oblivion. Listen, he'll do some singing, that's fine, whatever. But it does seem they at least understand, they have an internal logic for why he is where he is.
I agree, and I think a character like Tom Bombadil, it would be very easy to get kind of sucked into the big metaphor of who he is, why he exists, kind of what larger role he plays within Middle-earth. And I'm glad that they're not doing that. You know, as you said, they've got this focus of him kind of protecting the natural world. And I do think that that's where his singing will come into play. I mean, we saw it with Disa in season 1. You know, she sings to connect with the rocks in Khazad-dûm. So I think they might do something similar to that, where he sings to kind of connect with the world around him. You know, obviously there's going to be a little tune or two that he just sings willy-nilly, because that's what he does. That's Tom Bombadil. And if you don't like that, then tough. But as you said, you know, it seems very focused, and I like that he's going to be in Rhûn. And I also just wanted to quickly touch on his design, because I think The Rings of Power isn't a very kind of over-the-top show. And what I mean by that are that the character designs feel very grounded. And I was a bit worried that if they went for Tom Bombadil, they would have kind of like dulled him slightly, or kind of stripped away some of the things that made him kind of the character he is. But the first look we got of him with this kind of wizard's hat almost, the big blue coat and the yellow boots, it felt almost cartoonish, but I really liked that they went down that path. And I think it's towards the end of the interview, Rory does touch on that and the character design, and he makes a reference to his daughter wearing this like really ridiculous looking sheep hat, and how to everyone else but her it probably looked ridiculous, but she didn't care at all. She just kept wearing it because she liked it. And he says something like, you know, as adults we can all take something from that attitude. So I like that they're bringing that to Tom.
That quote was almost tailor-made for you, wasn't it? If someone were to write something to appeal to your inner self, I think that was the most Anna thing he could have said.
It was, and he's won me over. I mean, it didn't take much, but here I am, number one fan.
I think you're right about the design. It is obviously grounded in the sense it is not, you know, electric blue and mustard yellow, and, you know, he's not... Do you know one thing I'm glad about is that he's not... I often see him sort of... Because I can't remember exactly how tall he's meant to be from the books. He's obviously taller than the halflings, but he's not tall for a man.
Very short.
Yeah, but I'm glad they didn't make him look kind of comically short. You know, my thing with Tom Bombadil is I'm fine with him being a character of whimsy. What I don't want is for him to wander onto screen and I immediately just kind of go, oh, you don't belong on this screen. Like, the really difficult thing about Tom Bombadil is, and I completely understand why Peter Jackson didn't include him for several reasons, but the one thing I always think about how kind of grounded and gritty all the costuming was for all the other characters. And I'm just trying to imagine, you know, Tom, as he's described in the books, wandering on screen, and it's almost quite jarring. And so I think they've found a nice balance where it's, you know, quite a cool blue, it's, you know, a soft yellow, and then they've kind of got this, I don't know what you'd call it, this kind of tunic underneath, which just has this quite simple aspect to it, which I really like. And my favorite photo is definitely where he's standing outside this cottage, which is apparently where his living. And a great quote about it in the article about this picture is Patrick McKay says, Christian, who's the production designer, and our director Louise Hooper also had the idea that his summer cottage should be an oasis of life in the middle of the desert, dotted with orange and lemon trees and busy with goats, lambs, and bees. And I do think there's something quite, because they've taken him out of the forest, away from the Withywindle. I do like that they've still found a way that, it's... You know how this is a really bad analogy, but you know how like kings in medieval and kind of pre-modern times would have their summer palaces, whether it's in Russia where they'd have their summer dachas or in England where they'd have the summer palaces. There is a part of me that's like, oh, Tom, he's just got a villa in the south of France. That's where he goes when he's on holidays.
It's his holiday home.
Exactly, it's his whole. He's in the immortal words of Danny Dyer. He's in Nice with his trotters up, and as far as I'm concerned, he should be held effing accountable. Not to bring politics.
Great analogy.
Thank you. No, I am Danny Dyer, and Tom Bombadil is my David Cameron, and that's a joke exclusively for UK listeners. But yeah, no, I think I agree with you in terms of the design. I really like it, and I really like as well that picture of him standing with the stranger in his house, and there's this. There's on the ceiling of his house, there's this almost kind of star map. And again, in the article, Patrick McKay says, Christian Milstead, our production designer, had the idea of incorporating a star map on his ceiling to connect Tom with the larger universe and indicate that he has been watching the constellations for signs and for the stranger's arrival. And so I guess this is where we should probably talk about, what do you think of the idea of introducing Tom, but specifically introducing him into the stranger's story as the stranger heads east into Rhûn, which I think we even said on our last episode, we still don't have a clue what the stranger is going to be doing in Rhûn. So what do you think about this idea of putting a kind of canon character out of place but into the story to connect with the stranger who seems to be a canon character but obviously not confirmed? It's just an interesting mix. What do you think of all that?
I think, as you said, the Rhûn stranger Nori storyline was one that we were a bit unsure where it was going to go. And I think that there wasn't much that they could do with it this season because, as you said, the main focus is going to be Celebrimbor, Sauron, Galadriel, Elrond. All of this is going to be kind of the main plot point of the story. So this one felt like a little bit far removed. So in my eyes, kind of adding Tom Bombadil into the mix is just to kind of bring the audience attention back to that story. I mean, the stranger clearly went to Rhûn for help. He still doesn't know, well, we think he doesn't know who he is, what his bigger purpose is. And if Tom's being brought in with this knowledge of the constellations, which was such a big thing in the stranger's story in season 1, he could just be that kind of light against the mystics. I mean, we still unconfirmed if the mystics are back, but we're pretty sure that they're in Rhûn, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what I thought that they were getting themselves into. So adding Tom Bombadil into this is very strange. And I wonder if his kind of mission to bring back that kind of lush natural landscape to Rhûn will in turn bring the stranger into that, kind of help him with his own powers, something like that. Because Tom isn't a wizard in the sense like Gandalf, and I'm using finger quotes here, yes. Is. So they both have very different skills and abilities, and I wonder how those two characters will work together on screen.
Yeah, I think I have some concerns about it. And this will tie into something we're going to discuss later. I still have... and maybe it's not a concern, maybe it's a readjustment of expectations. If people remember on our last episode, when we discussed the trailer, one of our things was, making sure all the storylines feel connected, make sure they all feel they have a purpose. And one of the things I said was, I want Rhûn to feel like a real place. I want them to really develop it. I want it to feel like its own civilization, its own land with its own people. And I'm getting the sense we might not be getting that this season. Now, that is an area of concern for me. I will just say I have one theory which I am currently using to alleviate it, and I'm just going to suggest this to the audience because I think this might be worth bearing in mind. While I went into this season up till this point thinking, oh, we're going to get, kings and queens of Rune, and we're going to go to cities and towns. I'm not sure whether we're going to get to that this season, and here's why. It seems to me that season 2 is obviously going to be about Annatar and Celebrimbor. It's going to be about making the rings. But as it relates to the rings, it specifically seems it's going to relate to the 7 rings of the dwarves. Just as the first season led up to the 3 rings for the elves, this season, 7 rings for the dwarves. I've heard a lot of people say before they felt like we were going to go season by season. The second season will be about the importance of the 7. The third season will be about the importance of the 9, and so on and so on. And if that is the case, I get the feeling that while the stranger might be going into Rune this season, he is not going to reach, the deeply populated parts of Rune. I mean, Rune is a huge region. If you ever look at the maps, it's obviously partly this is just Tolkien being lazy, just being like, I don't know, it's this Eastern Kingdom. It's just a huge area. I've just marked it as Rune. Who knows? But because of that's exactly how Tolkien spoke. For those of you who never listened to his interviews, that is how he spoke. So I don't know what you think about this, but I am slowly recalibrating my expectations to think that we're not going to see as much of Rune this season as we thought. But I think the reason for that is that the stranger isn't going to be in Rune for just 1 season. He might be there for 2, and next season, and in season 3, once Sauron has his 9 rings, post what happens in Eregion, Sauron's going to go there himself to corrupt men. So I think that might be why. What do you think about that?
I think it makes sense structurally for the show to follow that kind of three-tier structure of the 3 rings, the 7 rings, the 9 rings. And I think it would be a lot to set up Rune as this entire place and also have the introduction of Tom at the same time. It's a very ambitious thing to go for. And if Tom's focus is on this kind of landscape of Rune, then you would expect it to be more on the outskirts, not in these kind of densely populated cities, civilizations, as you said. It wouldn't work with what they've put Tom into the story for. So I'm kind of on par with you here with what I hope is going to happen. But I think it's strange to have him outside of Rune for a whole season and then have him kind of finally do what he's there to do next season. So it just makes me wonder what his and the stranger's character development is going to be this season.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think Tom Bombadil is going to appear for more than 1 episode, maybe 2 at most. I think he's going to be a pit stop, for the stranger. The stranger's going to be walking to Rune with Nori, and then stops off for a cup of tea and some advice from jolly old Tom at his house. Some sing-songing and some probably cryptic lessons which don't make any sense because that's what Tom does. But this does actually trigger a question we got from our audience, which was from Alan Smith, who said, do you think the Stranger's storyline intersect with the other main storylines this season? And obviously, this is one of the things we talked about on our last 2 episodes. I think after seeing this, I'm leaning towards no this season. I don't know what you think.
I also think no. I mean, it was a choice that they made to keep him with Nori. And obviously, we also now have the confirmation that Poppy is there as well, which I'm happy about because I liked the dynamic between her and Nori. However, it was an interesting decision to still have him paired with the Harfoots because what we know from their storyline in season 1 was that it was very far removed from the rest of them. And I think that just means that they're going to kind of carry on with that because those are the characters they've put together. They've put Tom Bombadil into the mix. I just can't see how that is going to stretch over to any of the other storylines, at least in this season.
Yeah, I think I'm on exactly the same page as you. And like you said, we have people spotted in the trailer, which we didn't, to be fair to us, before we recorded our podcast episode reviewing the trailer, that Poppy is back. Just a brief thing from me on that. This might be another one of my hot takes that people are going to disagree with.
I mean, yeah, I saw your face turn when I said, oh yeah, I really liked Poppy and Nori together. You just went...
No, it's so don't throw me under the bus. Let me throw myself under the bus in my own way. I too loved Poppy and Nori, and here's what I'll say. For the audience, I am glad that Poppy and Nori are going to be getting back together because I think they had a great dynamic. I loved the two actors' performances. I think they played really well off each other. It was very emotional. But here's the problem. It was very good and it was very emotional. And the moment they separated was a beautiful emotional moment, which is now... try not to swear, which is now undermined by the fact, oh no, they're actually only going to be separated for a couple of episodes. Now, maybe, who knows, maybe that bit in the trailer where we see that Poppy's back when they're in that sandstorm thing and whatever, maybe that happens in the second half of the season and there is going to be a proper gap. But again, I'm happy for the audience because it's nice that we'll get to see it. But just from a sheer writing and like... It just annoys me. It's like, don't bait me with a good emotional moment and don't like tell me that like this matters to these two characters because they aren't going to see each other for a while. And like the whole thing was like, you know, are they ever going to see each other again? They're going their separate ways. Stop laughing at me this way. I don't like it. I've got to stop.
Sorry, I'm trying not to laugh. No, I get what you mean because it does take away from that kind of big dramatic goodbye. But I just kind of see it as she maybe tried to go without Poppy, tried to go with the other Harfoots, but tried to go without Nori even. But just couldn't do it and ran after her and hope maybe Poppy goes through her own trials and tribulations to try and catch up to the other two, but who knows? Maybe she just literally, it's like 1 second after Nori and the stranger leave and Poppy's actually like, just wait, I'm just going to come with you guys.
That's my point. It's like, can you imagine if you know, not even if you rewatch this show, if you're a new viewer who may be like, oh, I didn't catch season 1, but I'm gonna watch it now. Oh, season 2's out now, so I can just binge watch them all together. Can you imagine how weird that's going to be? Watching this beautiful emotional moment at the end of season 1, episode 8, and then season 2, episode 1 is just Poppy like, I changed my mind. I'm coming with you. It's just like, oh well. I'll put those tissues away that I was crying over your separation. Yeah, be like if at the end of Return of the King when Frodo's like, "No, Sam, you must go back home to your family." And Sam's
great
like,
impression.
Yeah, it's actually a very good Elijah Wood impression, thank you. And Sam's like, oh no, I can't. And then like if they then cut to like Sam just like diving onto the ship as it left, you'd be like, oh well, I guess Sam is abandoning.
I actually
his wife.
know a lot of people that would have loved that ending.
Oh, so do I. But anyway, we've got so sidetracked. Whose
fault was that?
Listen, I think we both know that it's a team effort on this podcast. Last couple of points I want to make on Tom Bombadil, because everyone knows I don't like Tom Bombadil. Everyone knows that I'm not terrifically pleased that he's included. But I do want to return to this idea that I think Rory Kinnear is a great choice. I've been a big fan of him for a long time. For those of you who haven't seen it, he's been in... The only way I can describe him is just someone who has incredible range in terms of going from... He is an incredibly funny act. Like, genuinely, I think a lot of people won't have seen stuff he's done where it's comedic, but he is bust-a-gut funny, and then he can be heartbreaking in his performances. I mean, I just think he's one of the most underrated actors. And a piece I want to pick up from the interview, which I think just demonstrates his emotional intelligence, is where he's talking about why he chose the accent he did. So he's chosen for Tom Bombadil to go with a Cornish accent. For those of you in the UK, you'll know what it is. For those of you who aren't, look up a Cornish accent. It's particularly unique. And he talks about how he settled on it, and he talks about going swimming off the coast of Cornwall. He says, the rock in Cornwall just sort of erupts out of the sea, and you can see all the layers of accretion. I was looking at it and just thinking, God, this has been here for so long. It's a bit like standing on Table Mountain, and you think, this mountain has seen everything, has seen this silly little city develop from this tiny little speck. It must feel so young to this mountain, this tiny little city, now a fantastic city. I remember looking up at these rocks and thinking, the things that it's seen, the sailors that have passed by. When I was thinking of the oldest part of Britain, that's where I naturally found myself being led. And I just think, what a what an absolutely inspired, emotionally intelligent, just kind of... He's not someone who's a massive Tolkien fan, but he has immediately understood this idea of Tom Bombadil as being this character out of time. He has been here since before the elves. He has been here since before the men. He has seen everything, yet he doesn't intervene. He's a pacifist who cares for nature and wants to protect it, but he wouldn't fight to protect it. He is an observer. And I just think, like, there are lots of people who always say, oh, the best actors in adaptations have read all the books and will be massive Tolkien fans. And this is yet another example for me where I'm like, he was just trying to decide on what accent to go for. And he chose the accent based on this really kind of metaphysical, philosophical view of who Tom Bombadil is in a character. And I just read that and I thought, you know what? I don't like Tom Bombadil, but I'm very interested to see what Rory Kinnear does with him.
I think that's a great quote. And I also heard just some reverence in your voice then when you were describing Tom Bombadil to me, whether or not you meant it. But I do like that he brought that reaction out of you, which bodes well for his performance as Tom Bombadil, because for a minute there, you were feeling that description of him.
Listen, I will quote, and who knows, maybe I haven't recorded the intro for this episode, but maybe I'll actually do a Tom Bombadil reading for the intro to this episode. I doubt it. But from Tolkien's letter number 14 to Naomi Mitchison, here's what he says about Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is not an important person. Now, there may be more to that letter, but I'm just going to leave it there. And if you haven't read the letter, you don't know if he goes on to say important things about Tom Bombadil. All you need to know is Tom Bombadil is not an important person.
Listen, the only thing that I'm going to come back at you with is the description that is given in the Vanity Fair article, and I just don't understand how you can read a character with this description and not like them. He's called a woodland-dwelling man with an ethereal presence and a penchant for nonsense songs and brightly coloured clothes. How does that bring hate to your heart?
I do not believe in whimsy. I am anti-whimsy.
Well, on that note, there were only two things that I had left on Tom Bombadil. The first one is one that I don't think is worth really theorising about because I just don't think that they'll include her. But I did wonder about the presence of Goldberry because she's obviously very intrinsically tied to the character of Tom Bombadil. But touching back on your metaphor of Tom going to his holiday home, I feel like they'll just go down the route of, Tom's here to kind of deal with the natural landscape, and Goldberry is just at home, holding down the fort. However, I think it would be quite a nice touch if he did bring her along. I mean, if they've got the rights to Tom Bombadil, they have the rights to Goldberry too, and I think it would be, if they're only going to be there for maybe an episode or two, I think it would be quite a nice touch to just have her kind of around in the story.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with Goldberry.
Just her husband.
Yeah, well, listen, for those of you who know the story, the first time Goldberry meets Tom, she tries to drown him in the river, and all I've got to say is she should have gone through with the deed. She was so close to ridding us of the scourge that is Tom Bombadil. No, I wouldn't hate I wouldn't hate in any way if she was in the story. I don't think she will be. I think if she was, they would have put it in the article. So I think I'm always a big fan of just getting people to set their expectations, and I know a lot of people would have liked to have seen Goldberry. Now, here's what I'll say. There is an option they could go with. So they introduced Tom Bombadil in Rhûn, who's on his travels, going to see what's going on in Rhûn and what's going wrong. There are going to be other characters in the vicinity of where Tom Bombadil permanently resides, in the Old Forest. There is a possibility we may actually get Goldberry, but she's back at home. She's not gone on this nonsense trip with Tom to Rhûn. She's going, you want to go to Rhûn? No, bugger off. Go do it yourself. And she's stayed there in their lovely home. So all I'm saying is I don't think this will happen, but there is a possibility we could see Goldberry, but she's just not with Tom at this point.
Interesting. And then I think the last thing that I wanted to mention, and I guess just see what you thought about it, was you mentioned obviously there were leaks and kind of rumours about Tom Bombadil being involved. And after the first teaser trailer, when we kind of saw that there might be Barrow wights involved, we kind of assumed, or at least there were a few people who assumed that when Galadriel, Elrond, and the elves are dealing with the Barrow wights, that would be where Tom is introduced to kind of come and save them from the Barrow wights, as he does in the Fellowship of the Ring, which makes sense. You see the Barrow wights and your mind kind of conjures up Tom Bombadil. So I'm assuming that that's not going to be the case. You know, it would be quite strange to have him there with the elves and then in Rune with the stranger and Nori. So do you think that they're just going to be completely removed, or do you think he's going to be there in any way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I agree with you. I think that's where I initially thought he'd fit into the story before we got this article. Now I don't think he's going to be there. I mean, what they've basically said in the article is Tom's noticed things aren't right in the world and he's gone east to investigate why. Now, there is a version of that where you could say, well, if Galadriel runs into the Barrow wights in episode 1 or 2 and Tom, drives them away and then he's like, why the hell are there Barrow wights here? And then he's like, I need to go east to find out. And he kind of says, "G'day to you, milady," because he's, a bit of a fedora tipping. No, I'm not going to be mean about Tom. I've got to stop being mean about Tom. He definitely says "milady," though. He's an
See,
absolute.
You understand how I felt about Halbrand, because every time he's brought up, you have to get in a little dig about him. That's how I felt in season 1.
People know my view. Tom Bombadil is a reactionary conservative who keeps his wife locked up at home. He's a he's a social
Jesus.
conservative. Listen, if he was born today, he'd be hosting a right-wing radio station. Anyway, okay.
Jesus Christ. Poor Tom. All he wants to do is frolic in the forest.
Yeah, I know. But who's allowed in the forest, Anna, and who isn't he allowing in the forest? He's going to build a wall around the old forest.
Jesus Christ. Your hatred runs deeper than I thought it did.
I don't even know if I can keep that in the show. We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, to get back to your original point, no, I think you're right. I now no longer think that he will be involved with the Barrow wights. I think, and we'll get onto this later when we talk about Empire, but I think that will actually be Galadriel's problem to solve, and I think it will play into the story how she's able to do that. The last thing I will just say about Tom, and why I do think it's a really nice idea if you're going to introduce him to have him hang out with the stranger, who I think, and I am 99% sure, and I will be very angry with the showrunners if they now do a bait and switch with me, I'm 99% sure the stranger is Gandalf. It is very nice to have Tom and Gandalf, or Proto-Gandalf, Gandalf by another name, hanging out, because there's this wonderful quote in the Homeward Bound chapter of Return of the King where Gandalf leaves the hobbits before they go to the Shire, and he says, "But if you would know, I am turning aside soon. I am going to have a long talk with Bombadil, such a talk as I have not had in all my time. He is a moss gatherer, and I have been a stone doomed to rolling, but my rolling days are ending, and now we shall have much to say to one another." And so, we know that the showrunners love taking obscure references from the books and kind of, spinning them out into a wider story. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was a favorite line of J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, and they just thought, you know what, let's tell people why Gandalf wants to go and have a chat with Tom, after the quest for the ring is over and after Sauron is defeated. So I do like that. And listen, we'll talk more about Bombadil once we see him in the show, and we can talk more about what they've taken inspiration from the books, because there's loads of quotes we could go over, but we've spent probably half an hour talking about him, which is more than I want to. So we hope you all enjoyed that, and I'm sorry if I offended anyone by, wishing violent death upon Tom. Right, we've got a small bit of news to cover that came out after the Tom Bombadil reveals. So that was the 29th of May. 2 days later, on the 31st of May, there was an article in The Hollywood Reporter which announced that Nazanin Boniardi, who plays Bronwyn, would not be returning and has not returned for the filming of season 2 and will not be present in the upcoming season. Now, when we filmed our trailer analysis episode, we talked about, obviously this announcement hadn't come out at the time, but we talked about the fact that, she hasn't appeared in any of the material. There's the scene in the behind the scenes of Arondir lighting what looked like, a pyre of Theo crying. And we speculated about this because she had previously announced on her own social media that she was taking a step back from acting to pursue her activism. But now it has been confirmed by The Hollywood Reporter. I don't have too much to say on this, but Anna, is there anything you want to, I know we talked on that last podcast episode about what that might mean for Theo and Arondir, but now that you've had it confirmed, any further thoughts?
I mean, this might be a bit of a controversial one, but I do have to admit that out of all of the original characters we got in season 1, Bronwyn wasn't my favourite.
Mm-hmm.
I think she was a good addition to Middle-earth, but I don't think that her absence in season 2 is kind of a huge detriment for me. And I think I can't imagine that she had a huge role to play in the first place. I mean, if you compare it to Adar, who was almost immediately recast when Joseph left, because clearly there was a big role for him to play in season 2. The same thing didn't happen with Bronwyn, and whether that's just because there was no kind of room for her to be recast, there was just no need to because of the role she could play in season 2. But yeah, it's kind of a shame that her role is falling into this, the woman dies and now the male characters in her life have a reason to move forward. I think it's a shame that her character's falling into that kind of trope, but if she's not coming back, there's not much they can do about it, really, is there?
Yeah, it feels harsh to call it a fridging because obviously it's not really like, in the sense that it doesn't sound like the showrunners planned for this to be the case.
Yeah.
So just a piece of context I want to give. So the article, while it doesn't really say this outright, it implies the reason was because, for those of you who know, Nazanin is very involved in activism around women in Iran. And so when she'd announced she would step back from acting, that was kind of the assumption. Now, I will read what she put out on Instagram, which I have my own thoughts on. She posted on Instagram after the Hollywood Reporter article came out. She said, quote, "I made the choice not to return for season 2 of Rings of Power. This was unrelated to my subsequent decision to prioritize my advocacy. Throughout my career, the values I have held most dear are honesty, empathy, and integrity. My character Bronwyn was committed to these same ideals in striving for a fairer world, which is why I connected so deeply with her. I look forward to sharing my latest projects with you soon." So, I'm just a little confused. I don't really understand someone saying, "I'm stepping back from acting," and then saying, "Oh, the reason I'm no longer in this TV show is not because I'm stepping back from acting, but I'm not going to say why. I'm just going to leave this kind of cryptic message which implies that the people involved with Rings of Power are dishonest." And, whenever someone does a statement that says, "I am all about honesty and fairness and equality," and then doesn't add the "but" or the "or," it just very much feels like a way of saying, unlike those people involved with the Rings of Power. Now, maybe I'm reading too harshly in it, and not that Nazanin Boniardi is ever going to listen to this podcast. And so I do want to be fair and just say, I have no idea. I've not heard anything about her reasons for her exit. Obviously I heard stuff about why Joseph Moore left. I say left. Why Joseph Moore is no longer in the show. And I don't know what this is about. I will say that when Ismael Cruz Cordova was interviewed for IGN on the piece we're going to talk about in a minute, he had nothing but nice things to say about Nazanin. And, I hope it wasn't because of anything really bad or really awful between her and the rest of the cast or crew. We may never know, and it's pointless speculating on it. But I just wanted to put that out there for context, because even if I think it's a bit of a strange statement to put out, I do think it's only fair that I let our listeners know that Nazanin says that it wasn't because of her break from acting. I don't understand it, but that's what she says.
Yeah. She also said somewhere that it would take a very special project for her to return. So whether there was something that just didn't bring her back to the Rings of Power, or something that she didn't like where Bronwyn's storyline was going, who knows? It's like you said, we're probably never going to know. But she's gone now, and we're going to have to deal with that.
And as you can tell from Anna's tone of voice, she is devastated.
Truly. No, I'm inconsolable. But it'll, as I said, there's this now effect that it will have on Arondir and Theo. Poor Arondir and poor Theo. Lost his mum, lost his girlfriend. They're not having a good time, but we will get on to them in a few minutes.
And let me just say, I'm kind of with you in that I think of all the original characters, I'm gonna lie and say, oh yeah, Bronwyn was one of my favorites. I did think that her love story with Arondir was really well done, and I will say one disappointment is that I think what that relationship was allowing them to do was allowing them to explore concepts which Tolkien only kind of touches on in terms of a relationship between a mortal and an immortal, and I always felt like they were sort of echoing the Andreth and Aignor story from the Silmarillion. So I am a bit disappointed we won't get to see more of that. But like you said, the challenge for the writers is now just how do they write that into being important for Theo and Arondir in a way that feels authentic. So we'll just have to see how they go with that. Anyway, that's a very short piece of news. And now we get to move on to something which I know is definitely much more up Anna's street, which is, of course, on the 3rd of June, we got what I would call, after the Tom Bombadil one, which was more of a reveal, we got our first real kind of character feature / interview, which was with Entertainment Weekly, who did a piece on Adar, who, of course, is returning as a character, but with a new actor, Sam Hazeldine. And Anna, I'm going to let you start with this, but overall, well, let's say this. When we did our last episode, how can I put it? You were still not convinced by Sam Hazeldine. You were very dismissive about his appearance in the trailer and about,
Can I just say
no. I think.
Shut up. So when you say that I was being dismissive about his appearance, let me get the record straight that I wasn't calling him ugly. Just his appearance as Adar. Let me get that out there, because people like to take things out of context.
I love my new sound effects board. Anyway, no, to be fair, you are right. I know what you're saying. You were more talking about the appearance of the character as it relates to when you have a recast and how it looks slightly different. But all the same, I'm just setting the context for the listeners. So, I think she doth protest a bit too much, but a bit on the defensive here. But Anna, obviously, you weren't convinced. I think it's fair to say you weren't yet convinced by him in the trailer. You didn't love the line reading you heard. You weren't enamored, as I said, with the visuals of it. Now, let me tell the viewers what happened. When I saw the article, I took the picture of Adar that's in this article standing with one of his is he standing with one of his orcs? I can't remember exactly which picture's which, but I took that and I sent that to Anna on WhatsApp, and you were like, no, I'm still not sure about it. And then you came back to me 5 minutes later, clearly having read the article, and sent me the other picture of Adar, and your exact words were, why didn't you send me this one? So Anna, maybe you can explain to the audience what you meant by that other picture of Adar, maybe winning you over a little bit more.
I will. First thing I'm going to say is that you did get the pictures the wrong way around. So the first one that you sent me was the one where he's kind of in his throne, I assume. He's kind of sat down and it's like a close-up of him. My biggest problem with this, and I think it's just my own issue, is that when they try so hard to capture the original Adar kind of through the makeup and the visual effects, is that when I'm looking at the new one, who clearly is not the same person, it just still looks quite uncanny to me.
No, you're wrong. Hang on. Sorry, I have been listening to you, but I knew I was being gaslit. I didn't.
Am I wrong?
You're wrong. I didn't send you the one of him on the throne. I was right. I sent you the picture of him with his very ugly orc, and I said, please tell me you see the vision with Sam Adar now. And you said, well, first you sent me 5 of the hands praying emojis, or the hands clasped emojis, and you said, no, but it's an improvement. And then about half an hour later, you sent me the one with him on the throne. And just for our listeners, here's exactly what you said. Harry, you dingbat. Why would you not lead with this one? Anyway, carry on with your story. Just want to set the record straight.
Okay, right. We're switching the pictures back around.
Yes.
Anyway, still stands that...
Which is very important.
Yeah. So... It's like uncanny to me sometimes when I look at him, and I think my brain is still just expecting to see Joseph's Adar, which is a thing on my part. I just need to get over that. And something interesting about the article, which I didn't know beforehand, was that Sam and Joseph have actually worked together before. And Sam had, a very nice thing to say about Joseph and the fact that he was kind of taking on this role from him, it's really interesting. But yeah, so from there, we've obviously got some new content from him, and the pictures. The one, obviously, I'm confused now about which pictures I like and I
for
don't
our
like.
audience, because maybe our audience, they also haven't, might have been a while since they've looked at the article. So we got 2 pictures with this article of Sam Hazeldine as Adar. The first one is a picture of him standing in a forest. It basically looks like he's wearing the same. They haven't really changed his costume at all. We can talk a little bit about the prosthetics in a little bit because they've changed a little bit. But he's wearing the same costume, and next to him is what I can only describe as the world's ugliest orc. It just looks like an orc that, has not been wearing, some sun cream, SPF factor 50. Looks like he's really having a bad time with the sunlight. He is, if you zoom in on his face, he looks horrified about his own existence, which I actually quite relate to. So there's that picture, and this is the one we're referring to that Anna was not convinced by. But then there is a second picture, and Adar is sitting. It's kind of a shot from the midriff up, and he is sitting on his very makeshift throne. His sword is propped up against the throne to his right, and he's kind of bathed in this orange glow, and he's glaring and looking rather menacing. So maybe it is the menace that won you over, perhaps.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the pictures now, and yeah, I'm back to where I was. I think it's the makeup and the prosthetics, as you said. There's something about them in that more zoomed out shot that just doesn't feel quite right to me. But
yeah,
you zoom in, he's in his chair, he's got his sword next to him. That's what I like. That's what I want to see. He looks like Adar in that picture, the kind of Adar that I've come to expect.
Do you know what? I'm looking at it now, and I love how for a podcast we're spending a good 5 minutes talking about pictures. If you're listening to this, go get the pictures up. It's like a choose your. It's like it's a read along. It's a read along. The thing I think about the picture, if you look at the one of him and the orc, it's quite. I don't know if this is a still from a show or a behind the scenes photo, because to me the lighting looks quite flat. Like it's not very well lit. Now it could be that this scene is purposely taking place in a gloomy forest and it's meant to be in that kind of very flat grey light, but if you compare the 2 images, one of these is very purposefully lighted. You've obviously got the orange back glow. The second one just kind of looks like if someone took a picture of me while I was out hiking with my, well, I guess I'd be the ugly orc friend. If someone took a picture of me and a very beautiful man out on a walk, and the lighting wasn't very good, this is what we would look like. But so yeah, I think it might be a lighting thing, and I think where that really comes into play is with the prosthetics, because especially with prosthetics and makeup, if you don't light it in the right way, it's just not going to look good. So, but let's talk about that. It's very clear to me that they've increased the amount of scarring on his cheeks. I think they might have adjusted. Their skin tone is that similar kind of very almost bone ivory color, that drained of all the flesh kind of element to it. But it really looks to me, and part of this might be just to help with the recasting, let audiences readjust, but it looks like they've really upped the ante with this kind of idea that he's damaged from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, I don't know whether, because what I really like about this article is that Sam and the showrunners very quickly touch on kind of Adar's main struggle for the season, which is something that we talked about a lot, and it's just that Adar wants to protect the orcs from both Sauron and the elves at the same time. So he touches on that really quickly. And I wonder if kind of the more prosthetics and this kind of more of a scarred look in Adar is to distance himself further from Sauron, who he'll be interacting with this season, and kind of align him more with the orcs, who, as you said, they're not the best looking guys, It kind of brings him more into line as the father of the orcs.
Yeah, and I think part of this is, and we talked about this a lot on the last episode, so I don't want to go into it, but Adar is a slightly sympathetic character, but I can guarantee you he is not going to do sympathetic things. And there is part of that going to be reflected in his, visage, so to speak. But let's talk about some of the quotes in that article, because as you say, they start off really strong, I think. It starts off with Hazeldine saying, "For me, the appeal was that he's a dark character, but he doesn't see himself as a villain. He's just trying to protect his children, the Uruk." And then what he says is, "So he's doing what he feels he has to do to save them from the genocide, whether that would be from Sauron, who sees them as cannon fodder, or from the elves." And he also says, "Adar is kind of in an existential crisis because he doesn't really know what to do next." Now, this for me is very encouraging, because I know we talked about this a lot in our last 2 episodes, this idea that Adar's dilemma isn't really about Sauron himself or the elves themselves. It's about this idea that he's managed to protect his children, in inverted commas, and he values them as people, or, as entities with a spirit and a soul, and Sauron doesn't. They are tools for war. And so it feels like this was hugely encouraging for me, because if the actor's saying it, that means that's what's written in the story. That's what we're going to see in the season. So this for me was very encouraging.
I agree. And I think one thing that I've taken away, and clearly you've taken away as well from all of the articles we've had, whether it's about Tom Bombadil, Adar, Sauron and Celebrimbor, is that it's almost like, and I'm not saying that the showrunners listened to the podcast, but it's almost like everything we brought up as a worry has kind of been dissuaded a little bit within these articles. Kind of they're touching on all of the things that we felt were most important to season 2. So it's really nice to hear that those things are being kind of prioritized and genuinely considered as part of the story. Sam clearly has this idea of where he wants Adar to go in season 2. And that makes me feel more confident about it, because clearly he has this very clear vision of the character, and he understands the character in the same way that we do, which I think is really important, because one of the things that I liked the most about Joseph's performance is that you could tell how much he understood Adar's character, and that just bled through in almost every scene that he was in. So regardless of what I feel towards the makeup or the design, I think that Sam is on the right tracks with Adar. So it's as you said about Bombadil. I don't have that much disdain towards Adar at all. You know that I don't, but it's like I'm filled with this confidence now, and it's like I don't. And it's as you said, we're just seeing these kind of stills behind the scenes. So I'm thinking if I see him kind of like, in more of a trailer where he's kind of moving around doing stuff, I'm feeling more confident. I still wasn't a fan of that line read in the trailer, but again, it's like a 2-second clip, so.
Yeah, I think you only dislike it because you heard me say it too many times in our last episode.
Yeah,
and now
you did ruin that for me.
Yeah, I mean, not that anyone should want to hear about anything slithering in, but I do apologize for ruining that for anyone else. Now, there's other quotes that in this article that talk about more of the kind of practicalities of filming with the other orcs and the black speech, and we're going to come on to those, but the bit that I found really interesting comes at the end, actually. And the article says this: "In addition to showing what's next for Adar and the Orcs of Mordor, Season 2 will also show viewers where they came from, as in, how did he go from being an elf to an orc? Viewers will also see how previous confrontations between Adar and Sauron unfolded." And Hazeldine says of his origin, "There was an offer for power and for something else which you'll find out later on in the show, and Adar willingly took the deal. It's kind of like he took a red pill and was duped. He was horrifically tortured and maimed." I mean, Anna, not to say that we were 100% spot on in our last episode where we talked about getting to see Sauron's backstory in the prologue, getting to see what happened with him and Adar in that scene in the Forward Waith. I mean, this feels to me like we were 100% spot on about how this season's opening.
I think we were 100% spot on. It's like I think that they mustn't have filmed half of season 2 until after we put out the podcast episode, and then they went to film the rest of it based on what we said.
Do you know what? You know how right I think we were? I think we actually need to pause for... That's better. Oh, the applause. Thank you, everyone. But yeah, this is the thing. Like, I think we are. Who knows how long season 2's prologue will be? Obviously, Galadriel's opening prologue, if you include everything that happens in the frozen waste up north, I mean, it goes on for a good 10-15 minutes. So we could be opening the season with 10 to 15 minutes of Sauron, and within that, Adar. So who knows how much we could see.
Yeah, and I'd be very happy with that sort of opening. I mean, they clearly they clearly mentioned that. I can't remember which article it was in. I think it might have been in the next one. No, one of the ones we're going to talk about in the future. But they talk about season 1 being about the heroes and season 2 being about the villains. So I think it would make a lot of sense for them to just open that up with the kind of flashback. And I know that this specific article about Adar was from Entertainment Weekly, but we did get 2 pictures from Empire that kind of tie into this. One of them is a picture of Adar, which, incredible. He looks amazing.
To tell us how you feel about that picture, because I saw some reactions from other people on Twitter about that one in particular.
I don't think that I can honestly say what I think about it into a microphone.
Okay.
But it was very good. Loved it. But there is another one we got of Sauron or Halbrand, which a lot of people think is from this flashback scene because he's clearly in these kind of weird brown robes, and a lot of people think that he's not gone back to his Halbrand form, but they think it's pre-Raft. A lot of people refer to him as. So I think that might be from this kind of prologue section, which is very interesting, and I'm really excited to see kind of Sam and Charlie play off each other, because the next time they see each other, will he come back in this form, or will he reappear as Annatar to the orcs? Who knows?
The most interesting thing about this quote for me was that bit at the end from Sam where he said there was an offer for power and for something else, which we'll find out later on. And Adar willingly took the deal. It's kind of like he took a red pill and was duped. He was horrifically tortured and maimed. And I wrote about this on Twitter when this article came out. And I said, and this is really for listeners who've read the Silmarillion. So if you haven't, I'll try and explain a bit of the context of what I'm talking about, but don't worry if this bit kind of goes over the head a little bit. So I said on Twitter, I already felt like the writers took some inspiration for Adar's appearance from Meiglin, but this idea of Adar making a devil's bargain and taking a red pill really does make me think they took a lot of inspiration from Meiglin's story in terms of his character traits. And without explaining too much about who Meiglin is, Meiglin's character in Silmarillion, he's an elven character. But the most important thing to understand about Meiglin is, at one point, he's taken prisoner by the orcs. He's brought to Morgoth's fortress, which is called Angband. And there he's tortured. And in the end, to stop the torment and, at some point everyone breaks, it's basically said that he purchased his life and freedom by revealing to Morgoth the very place of Gondolin and the ways whereby it might be found and assailed. Great indeed was the joy of Morgoth, and to Meiglin he promised the lordship of Gondolin as his vassal, and the possession of Idril Celebrimbor when the city should be taken. And indeed desire for Idril and hatred for Tuor led Meiglin the easier to his treachery, most infamous in all the histories of the Eldar days. So anyway, it doesn't matter. If you haven't read the Silmarillion, don't worry too much about that. The point is that Meiglin's character, who is captured, who is tortured, who then betrays his people in order to get something. Now, the really interesting thing was in season 1, Galadriel says to Adar, you are one of the Moriond, or the Sons of the Dark. Basically, it's implied to us that Adar was one of the first elves captured and twisted and corrupted and turned into the kind of predecessor to the orcs. I saw some people saying after this article came out, well, how does this make sense? What's this about a deal being taken? Because that's not really what happened with the orcs. And I've got a couple of things to say about that. So number one, this deal he's talking about may not be about a deal with Morgoth. It's about a deal with Sauron. So this might be a deal that was taken after Morgoth's fall at the end of the First Age, which will lead into the prologue and we'll see about. Or alternatively, I think it's worth saying that we don't know while Galadriel is the one to call him one of the first orcs, he doesn't really confirm it or deny that. And the most interesting thing is during season 1, when he's talking to Arondir, he talks about walking down the banks of the river in Beleriand when he was young. Now, if he was one of the first orcs taken by Morgoth, he would never have been to Beleriand as an elf, because the first orcs were taken from Cuiviénen, which is way, way, way far out east, even past Rhûn. So anyway, this is a very long way of saying that I think what I find very interesting about this is, A, they're clearly taking some inspiration from his character, from characters in Silmarillion who they can't obviously tell the story of, and B, it creates added layers beyond just this idea that that Adar would have been one of these elves captured and tortured, and then it's so much it could add, and we'll obviously have to see how it plays out, but I'm very excited because I think it could add even more layers to his character. Like, what could Sauron have possibly offered him? What is this deal? That's what fascinates me.
I agree, and I think it's one of my favorite things that the showrunners do because, as you said, they're clearly very big Tolkien fans, and you touched on before of them taking like little quotes that they do have the rights to, and kind of interweaving those into the bigger story, but also kind of making references to things that they might not have the rights to, but they can do little nods to. And I think that that's really good because it doesn't overpower the narrative for people who haven't read the Silmarillion. But for people who have, you can kind of really clearly see the references as they unfold. So I think they're really nice little touches.
Yeah.
As for the deal that's made, I don't know. I think obviously it's going to be about some sort of power, whether it is to give him this position as the father of the orcs, to give him his own kind of force.
Yeah, let me jump in there. Is it about power, or do you think maybe Sauron promised in some way to free the orcs? Now, Morgoth's been defeated, so I'm not sure what exactly you're freeing them, but maybe he promised that he would give the orcs, the ability to live in sunlight, or I'm just wondering whether Sauron, because if what we've established throughout everything we saw of Adar in season 1 and this interview is that Adar's number one priority is the safety and a homeland and a future for his children. What if Sauron, who of course we know is the deceiver in chief, what if he said to him, "Oh, follow me, Adar, and I will grant your children freedom and create an even better land for them, or remake them to," I think there's a possibility that it wasn't a deal for power. It was specifically a deal for something for the orcs, which would be super interesting because that would be, we talked last season about how we loved that the show's really got into this idea of whether the orcs are kind of naturally evil, what does it mean to be evil but to have a soul in a world with a true one god and everything like that. So I think it'd be super fascinating if the deal was actually in some way to benefit the orcs.
I mean, it would definitely make sense and give him the motivation for creating Mordor, apart from just in servitude to Sauron. I mean, if he has that bigger purpose of creating kind of a safe place for his children to live. And it's interesting because, he thinks that he's killed Sauron in season 1. So it's got to be some sort of emotional response that evoked him to literally try and murder him. So whether he kind of pulled back from that deal or something happens that just kind of this split second thing, Adar just tries to kill him or almost succeeds.
Well, we obviously still have that line from season 1 where he says, "I sacrificed enough of my children for Sauron's ambition." So clearly, and we know that Sauron was trying to tap into the power of the unseen world, which goes back to the rings and everything else. So, we could speculate for days, but there's clearly something very interesting that happened there. The last couple of points I want to touch on from the article are Sam's approach, and I think there was something really interesting here, was when Sam was talking about the languages he had to learn for the show, and he said, quote, "The hardest thing was I had to go straight into speaking black speech on day 1. It is hard on your throat, and it's hard to remember because it doesn't really follow the Elvish languages, which have roots in real languages like Welsh and Finnish. But he just didn't, he meaning Tolkien, but Tolkien just didn't write that many words in black speech." And then there's this comment, this is an editorial comment, "But Hazeldine took the challenge as an opportunity and actually had the show's Tolkien lore experts rewrite some of his lines from English into black speech in order to give Adar the proper gravitas." I mean, if you needed another reason to be excited for Sam's portrayal of Adar, I mean, that for me just made me thought, wow, I cannot wait to see what he does with this.
I do love that. I feel like this is just something that Tolkien inspires, but I love how much language has kind of a place in his adaptations. You have Sam using the black speech to kind of elevate his character a bit more. You had, that quote from Rory about using this kind of Cornish accent to give his characters more layers. And I think that listen, Tolkien would have hated probably every adaptation of his work, but I'd like to think that he would be happy about language still being such an important aspect of it, that it shapes how people play his characters.
Yeah.
And I think Sam just clearly is rising to the challenge, which is a hard one, taking over a role that someone else did so well. Yeah. And one of the parts of this, this set, I mean, the article that made me laugh was when he was talking about going onto set with all of the orcs.
Yeah.
And he talks about, going, that there were like 200 orcs in the room and they were all kind of grunting. It's quite intimidating, and it was helpful to remind myself that I'm not insane and they are just people. Which is just, it's very funny to imagine just going onto set as this, there was a lot of talk. I think Charlie mentioned this in Empire magazine that, coming from season 1 to season 2 was less scary because he knew what to expect this season. But going straight into season 2, where you're kind of playing off all of these people dressed up as like horrifying orcs, and having to speak in black speech every day, I can imagine that would just be like the strangest experience to face as an actor.
And if you haven't been on, because we'll talk about that quote from Charlie in Empire, which I think is really interesting, but I'm sure it's the same for Sam, where it's like, if you have, and I was going to say, if you haven't worked on a production of the scale before, but there haven't been many, if any, productions of TV, you could probably say Game of Thrones to an extent in the latter seasons, sort of House of the Dragon at the moment. And I like House of the Dragon, I have no problem with it, so people please don't misinterpret this, but I think the scale of production for Rings of Power is something else, and I think it would be intimidating for any actor. But here's the other thing I found really interesting, and it's something people have forgotten a lot. In a lot of scenes in season 1, people said, oh, there should be more extras, or, oh, why is that crowd obviously full of digital doubles rather than real cast members? And people forget a lot of it was filmed during COVID, and so they couldn't. Yeah. And so how reassuring is it just to see in this one interview with Sam where he's talking about walking on set with 200 extras and they're just orcs? I mean, I personally do know that there were a lot of like the UK kind of background performers and extras who worked on this show. Like there were a lot of background performers hired for this show, but I'm very excited because that just shows they've really gone an extra mile to make sure that it's not just all CGI. And we'll get onto that with the Empire magazine piece again. But that filled me with a lot of hope as well.
Me too. And I think it's a strange, I think, parallel to make. But when I read that, it reminded me of when Ian McKellen was talking about working on The Hobbit. And, there's this kind of famous clip of him having a breakdown because he's supposed to be having this conversation with an entire company of dwarves, but he's just sat by himself talking to like no one basically, and they kind of put all the dwarves in after the fact. And I think even though Sam goes on to this quite intimidating experience, it must just be so nice from kind of an acting perspective to have the 200 orcs that you're trying to speak to right there in front of you. And I think that it will just help us as well be immersed in that. I mean, even from that picture of him with the orcs, you can see them all in the background. They all have that like insane practical effect, prosthetics on, and they don't really pull any punches when it comes to the VFX, practical effects. And they didn't in season 1, and it just looks better in season 2 already. So everything like that, I just have complete faith in.
Yeah. Anything else from, I mean, I think we've covered pretty much, well, actually, I'll let you add if there's anything else, but also, as I said, bringing in questions from the community, which I've collected. And we did have a question about Adar. Luna, who goes by the handle at LoonLena, says, I'm making assumptions that Adar will not survive season 2, but I'd love discussion on how this story may conclude. There's potential where he could have, if not a semi-redemptive death, then a poignant one. But marketing describes him as being very brutal this season, so I'm intrigued. So I guess let me phrase that to you in two ways. Okay, let me ask you this one first, and then I'll ask the second question. Do you think Adar survives this season?
I don't.
Okay.
When I went into when we finished season 1 and got the news about the recast, I actually originally thought Adar was going to be killed off in episode 1, just to reintroduce Sauron. I do think he'll be around for longer, but I don't think he's going to make it to the end.
And so you think he will die this season. So in that sense, answering I'll list a question here from Luna, do you think there's a potential he could have either some kind of redemptive death or a poignant one? If you're thinking about how his story might end by the end of season 2, do you see it as being poignant, redemptive, tragic? I mean, I know we're doing huge speculating here to even say, we've already decided he's going to die, and now let's work out what the tone is. But do you think there's a way for Adar, even if he's not redeemed, to have a death by the end of season 2, which also perhaps makes the audience pity him? Maybe that's the right way to look at it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that it will be redemptive in the sense that we forget about every bad thing he's done, because as much as he is a tragic character, he is still a villain. He does bad things, he kills people. So I don't think that his death will redeem him. But if he does die, this might just be something that I want to see, but I do believe that it will be for the orcs, for his children. He'll die in some way to kind of save them. I think that's what I'd want from him, and that's how I think that they would give his death meaning. If, he maybe stands up to Sauron towards the end of the season, something like that, just for his children. And I don't know, I mean, it could always parallel season 1. His first introduction, he's kind of teased for 3 episodes, and then he's brought in as this, you follow him from behind and there's this really menacing music, but then you're put right away into this really poignant scene of an orc dying. And as Tolkien watchers, viewers, we're not used to having that kind of sympathy for the orcs, but they go into this immediate thing of him kind of putting the orc out of its misery, but he's crying as well. And it just puts him in this really unique light, and I wonder if they could parallel that if he does die. I think that would be a really good way for them to do it tonally.
Yeah, I mean, you could either go with the parallel approach where he's kind of put out of his pain by one of his orcs, if he's left wounded on the edge of death, or you could go really kind of still poignant but kind of dark and horrifying, is that he's been manipulated by Sauron all through season 2. Clearly he's involved in attacking Eregion, so why does he do that again? We still don't really have much information on that. Is he manipulated? Is it this part of a new deal? What's going on there? But I think it would be equally tragic if we did parallel that scene, but kind of inverted, where Sauron delivers the killing blow and there's no tears in his eyes. It's just cold. It's just, you were a tool to me and I am glad to be done with you now. Now, but here's what I'll say, because while I asked you the question, I didn't answer it myself. I'm going to go with my hot take. Adar 100% survives season 2 and goes into season 3.
100%.
100. We're not doing a bet like we did with Ontimo and Volundil, because I lost the last one.
100% is very. I know. I think this calls for another bet.
Okay. We'll work out the term.
Yeah, we can figure out the terms later on.
Before season 2 airs, we'll work out the terms of our bet. But to be clear, you think he's going to die this season, and let me just explain why, because otherwise I just sound like I'm being contrarian for no reason. I think, post what's going to happen at the end of season 2 with what happens with Eregion and Celebrimbor and all of that, what we know happens in the story then is what I would describe as the bulk of the really bad part of the war of the elves and Sauron, where Sauron is basically just going across Eredor until a certain point, which I won't spoil for listeners into his future, but until a certain point, Sauron is really just going across Middle-earth, and it is not going well for the elves. The elves are pinned back in their kingdoms, and I think because we're going to need to see Sauron distributing the 9 rings, and I still think we'll see him go east to Rhûn in season 3, I think he's still going to need someone to prosecute his military campaigns like he's using Adar for in season 2. So here's my theory, that Adar will survive season 2 because they'll need someone to still be that military threat and presence. But here's my big thing. I think that by the end of season 2, Adar, whether he's been manipulated or coerced or whatever, I think by the end of season 2, he's going to be like, how can I put this? He's going to be like a broken animal, where he's almost beaten into submission and he no longer has the ability to resist Sauron. And I think that would be him not dying, but being forced into, like leaving the viewers with this idea, like Sauron doesn't let him die. Maybe in fact Sauron stops, shows him mercy, but only to basically say, no, you belong to me now, and now you have no choice. So anyway, that's my theory.
I think that's a good theory, but you've just kind of conjured a new theory in my mind.
Okay.
So hear me out. Adar dies at the end of season 2. It's not from Sauron, it's not from an orc, but from someone else who then becomes Sauron's main military hand and strategist. And that person is Waldreg.
You were doing that so sincerely. I
could see you following along, like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
who?
I was like, who's she gonna say? And do you know what? I thought if you were gonna bamboozle me, you were gonna go, and that is Damrod the troll, and I was gonna be like, you But no, you got me with the wardrobe. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for getting me invested. I was actually really excited with what you were going to say. Okay. That's obviously the Adar article that we've talked about. And as I cut Anna off before she was going to start talking about Adar's new friend, which we will get to in the Empire feature. So for any of those who are fans of big ugly trolls, just bear with us, because we got one more big character reveal, or feature I should say, before we got to the big Empire magazine feature, and that was on the 7th of June when IGN released an article about 3 characters in particular, one being Isildur, one being Arondir, and the third being Estrid, which is this new original character played by Nia Tal, who we've talked about before, given that she was one of the only characters we saw in a leaked set picture standing with Isildur. So we already knew this was coming in a sense, for those of us who have kept up with these leaks. And I'll just read the first couple of lines of this article for those of you who don't quite remember it, and then I'll go straight to you, Anna, for your thoughts. So, Estrid first meets up with Isildur and Arondir at the beginning of Season 2. She pairs up with the two after Isildur heals from his injuries, and Arondir and the rest of the Southlanders continue to plan for their trip to Pelargir to further themselves from Mount Doom. Isildur immediately trusts the young woman. Don't worry, we'll get to that cozy photo in a minute. Arondir, on the other hand, believes she's hiding something and is much slower to believe that Estrid can be trusted. So, Anna, we finally have a proper reveal of Isildur's... You know what? Let's just say it. We finally have a proper reveal of Isildur's future wife. Over to you.
Yes, I mean, there was quite a lot of debate for when this was first released of, is this going to be one of those kind of one-season romance stories that's never touched upon again? But I really don't think they will do that, because it's just going to be an absolute waste of time. I mean, this article talks about the fact that by the time we reach the fall of Númenor, which will probably be kind of maybe 2 seasons away,
I think so.
Isildur has a wife and a child. So if we kind of carry on with the timeline that we have been doing, it will make a lot of sense for Estrid to be his wife by the time that we get to the fall of Númenor. There's no point giving someone like Isildur a romance story that doesn't end up anywhere. And I think, listen, let me just say it, they're a very attractive couple. That it's giving future king and queen, And I like it. I think Isildur, now more than ever, needs a little bit of happiness, a little bit of romance. And I like that they're giving this sort of different approach to Isildur and Arondir, which I think kind of makes sense based on where they are at this point. I mean, Isildur has essentially just been abandoned by his entire family, who have gone back to Númenor. However, he might try and justify it because, they thought he was dead. But he's probably going to need that comfort, someone to lean on, and this kind of new woman appears out of nowhere. And it's going to kind of bloom this little relationship, which I think is nice. And then Arondir, on the other hand, has probably just lost Bronwyn. However that may be, I think, we talked about this shot of him over what looked like a funeral pyre. So we do think she's going to get killed off in some way. So that gives him reason to be hesitant to trust again when someone new enters their lives. But I think it makes sense, and I think that dynamic of having Isildur and Estrid having to kind of work to gain Arondir's trust will be quite interesting. And I do also wonder what Theo's role is going to be in this, because we do assume that he's going to be traveling with Arondir, but no mention of him is made here, and he's not in any of the pictures either that we've seen of these 3 traveling.
He is conspicuously absent, but I think that may just be the way the article's framed. I think Isildur is basically going to join up with the Southlanders, and they are going to go to Pelargir, and I don't think they'll be in Pelargir in episode 1. I think it'll take him a few episodes. I mean, I think Isildur's first episode, he's still got to get out of Mordor itself. So, there's that whole challenge for him. And then he's got to meet up with, as it said there in the article, he's got to meet Estrid. Now, what's interesting is it says that Estrid meets up with Isildur and Arondir at the beginning of season 2, which makes me think that maybe Isildur finds Arondir first and then Estrid joins the group. Now, we still don't know where she comes from. Is she another one? Because obviously there wasn't just Tirharad in the Southlands. There was other towns. We saw Horden, which was the one at the beginning of season 1 that was destroyed. But, one can naturally assume there were other towns and villages that were affected by Mount Doom's eruption and the presence of Adar and the Orcs. So there will be other Southlanders who will be on this exodus, on this almost kind of refugee march away. I do just want to address something which has annoyed lots of people I'm good friends with on Twitter, and has annoyed me as well. Let me say this as calmly as possible. Just because an article mentions that Estrid might have something to hide, and because Arondir doesn't trust her, that does not mean that she is Shelob in human form. If you think that is a likely theory, I need you to stop playing very bad Lord of the Rings video games. I need you to stop looking at every female character as if they must be, an anthropomorphic animal villain. She's hiding something. It could be literally anything. It could be the reason she's not with her people anymore. It could be something to do with Adar and the Orcs. It could be anything. But she is not going to be Sauron in disguise or Shelob in disguise. And every time I post about Estrid, someone comes into my comments and is like, oh, how is a spider going to make an alliance? And I'm just like, shut up. Stop leaving these comments. You are annoying me. And I'm usually trying to be kind to people on Twitter. And so that's why I'm putting it on the podcast. But if you are one of these people, stop coming into my comments when I post about Istrid and saying that she's Shelob or that she's Sauron. It's just annoying. End summary.
That's genuinely might be one of the most insane theories I've ever heard. And touching on that, I went into the replies of one of the articles, and I think it was the one where we got that picture of Celebrimbor and Annatar, kind of a newer one. I just went into the replies of a tweet like that. Big mistake. I don't know why I still do that. But someone was, complaining about Celebrimbor's casting. And who was he using to defend his own point of view? Of course, it was the Shadow of Mordor version of Celebrimbor. And I think that game has rotted a lot of people's brains, because if you're using that as your kind of standpoint against...
If I had any hair, I would pull it out, but I don't have enough hair left. It's just shut up. Shut up! Stop saying things. Stop talking. You don't have a brain. The Celebrimbor in Shadow of Mordor is one of the stupidest... It's one of the worst adaptations. It ruins Celebrimbor's character. It ruins Isildur's character, by the way, at one point in that story. It ruins everyone's character in that story. Even Gollum, isn't as fun as he is in the films or the books. Sorry.
Yeah, so if you use Shadow of Mordor as your kind of basis for what Middle-earth adaptations should be, then nothing you say has any meaning to me, and I will not kind of take it with any...
I'm sorry for
shouting,
reverence. By the way. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I think it's justified in that case, because why can't there be a romance between Isildur and a woman without there being some kind of grand mystery towards it? She's just a woman. She might be kind of, we don't know anything about her character except that Arondir doesn't trust her, so she must be a spider.
And it's just, you kind of said this at the start, and I think I've seen other people say this, some people who we're kind of friends with on Twitter, this idea that it's going to be like a bait and switch romance where they're going to get together and then Isildur's going to find out the dark secret she's hiding and then they're going to split up. And actually, this isn't going to be Isildur's future wife. It's like, we've got 4 seasons of this television show left. To put it bluntly, he needs a wife, he needs children, otherwise Isildur's story doesn't really make any sense, because otherwise Aragorn may as well not exist, wouldn't exist. So, the idea that the show's like, oh, well, we've only got 8 episodes a season, and we've only got 4 more seasons, and, probably 3.5 more seasons. Yeah, it's just like, please stop trying to overthink everything.
Yeah, I think it comes down to people's kind of consumption of media sometimes, is that not everything has to be like a grand plot twist or a grand plot point. And I think it has more of an impact if it is just a straightforward romance story, because we touched on, when we watched like the first teaser trailer, we touched on the fact that Isildur will eventually be a king over in Middle-earth, and he's kind of going through this process of getting to know the land that he'll one day rule. And I think that him meeting and falling in love with his future wife in that same place is very nice, and it's a very nice detail. So I think if that's just kind of a very simple love story,
Yeah.
I'm happy with that. There doesn't need to be a grand plot twist involved.
It's it just angers me so, and I appreciate some people. And listen, if you're feeling a little upset that I shouted at you, or if you're the sort of person who's been leaving comments about Estrid being a spider, yes, I do find it annoying. If you're doing it as a joke, fine, but please let me tell you, it stopped being funny the day after the article came out. And if Shelob is in the season, given that we've seen these shots of Isildur in what looks like, a cavern with spider webs and all this stuff, fine. Shelob is maybe Shelob's in the season, but Shelob isn't going to be a woman, and she certainly isn't going to be Isildur's love interest. Just use your brain. And I hate people going, oh, well, the show did all these mystery boxes in season 1. No, it did too. It did who is Sauron and who is the stranger, and the two were kind of interlinked anyway. And yes, I know people found the mystery box annoying, and that's fine. I understand that perspective. But can we just stop inventing this idea that some people have that like season 1 had 12 mystery boxes? It really didn't. It had two or three
some people act
at
like
most.
we didn't know who any of the characters were when we started season 1.
Yeah.
Like it was like this grand reveal at the end. But I don't know. It's like you said about the marketing. I think a lot of people just misremember things that happened in season 1.
Yeah.
2 years after the fact. But yeah, it's
you would think that season 1 ended with like Galadriel, like a Scooby-Doo villain, pulling off a mask and being like, "I would have got away for it were it not for you pesky elves," And it turns out that Galadriel was Sauron all along. So yeah. Anyway, we've got sort of off track, but I'm sure people enjoy us ranting about these issues. Anyway, back to Isildur and Arondir and Estrid. Let's touch on Arondir first, because I think we can return to Isildur and Estrid. Isildur's PR manager, one of our listeners, Armenelos, who does the amazing pieces of art. I'm sure if you're on Twitter, you will have seen Joel's art, some amazing pieces. And they say, I'm also really curious to hear speculations on what Arondir is going to be up to this season, besides being a third wheel. Now, that's the question, but I also want to reference Fellowship fans. They've got a thread for any of you who missed the video where there was the interview with Maxim and Ismail, which wasn't particularly interesting, but there was some funny moments in it, and one of them was Maxim saying, "We become the policemen of Pelargir." So I think in terms of what Arondir is going to be up to, obviously part of it is protecting the Southlanders as they head south to Pelargir. But I still think, and we've talked about this, we talked about this at the end of season 1, so God, almost 2 years ago now. We've talked about this in the trailer episodes. I think Arondir's story is really about all these competing responsibilities. The responsibility he feels to Theo, which is only going to be heightened by Bronwyn's death, his responsibility to the people of the Southlands who he's guiding, and then when Sauron's forces march to war, I think Arondir is going to feel a responsibility to his own people, the elves of Middle-earth. So I think this season for Arondir is really going to be about this idea of who is his responsibility to, and what should he be dedicating his immortal life to protecting. And I think that's the dilemma he's going to be facing.
I think it's interesting because I think from character perspectives they're very different, but I think that Isildur and Galadriel will be starting season 2 from very kind of similar mental spaces, in the fact that they've both failed in a sense. And if we're sorry, did I just say Isildur or Arondir? I can't remember.
You said Isildur.
Yeah, sorry, I meant Arondir. So
That's okay.
Galadriel and Arondir both kind of failed in season 1. And I think from Arondir's perspective, he failed the Southlands. He failed Bronwyn, who is now dead, probably. And he's also failed Theo because he's lost his mother. So from his perspective, he's just kind of, he's very down. He's not done what he set out to do in season 1. The reason he was in the Southlands was to protect them. That was his entire reason for being there. He had that connection with Bronwyn and Theo, who, again, he's failed. So I think this season will be about redemption for him, making it up. And whether he goes kind of too far into that, going kind of overexerting himself in the service of others. I don't know how that's going to play out in terms of whether he'll join the elves in battle, whether he'll kind of stick with Isildur and Estrid wherever they end up going. But I think he'll be kind of trying to prove himself again. He'll be kind of trying to step up as family to Theo, when he's got none left. So I think it's going to be a sad season for him. I think Ishmael said himself that he's just in a very dark place, and he's going to have to kind of crawl out of that.
Yeah, he said in that behind the scenes video, the darkness has got to him, and obviously that is going to be related to Bronwyn's death and everything that happened in season 1. So, and I think it'll also be interesting, and we still don't know anything about Pelargir, whether it's already going to be occupied by Númenorian colonists, whether there's going to be other Southlanders there, or whether it's going to be abandoned. But I think, again, there's this idea of, okay, the Southlanders of Tir Harad now see Arondir as their protector, but if he comes across other mortal humans, how do they see him, and does that affect it? And how is Theo going to be affected by his mother's death, and does he now look at Arondir in a different way? Because they seemed to almost be a family at the end of season 1. Can that survive that tragic loss? So there's so much stuff going on there, which I think it's very hard to speculate. It's a good question that we're asked, but I just think we don't know enough. Yeah, but again, I think it's going to be about him having these competing responsibilities in his life, and it almost goes back to that conversation he had with the Watch Warden at the start of season 1, where the Watch Warden, so was that his name? Watch Warden? I think that's what he was called. Revion.
R.I.P.
Why was it sad he died, Anna?
Just, I felt really connected to him.
Yeah. Did you? Interesting. But they had that conversation about reminding Arondir about what their job there was, and about this idea of the darkness inside men. This quite patronizing view the elves have of men, and so it's interesting to see whether his very empathetic view to mortals can actually survive what happens with Bronwyn, and who knows what's going to happen. So, I'm also just very interested to see the interaction between Arondir and Isildur, because Isildur is so relatively, he's still a boy compared to Arondir. Arondir's hundreds of years old. So there's that very interesting, and I think again this all goes back to like we talked about with Isildur, building a connection to the land he'll one day rule, building a connection to the people he'll one day rule. Part of that is also building a connection with the elves, which we already saw him have a little bit of connection with Galadriel in season 1. But because obviously where we end up in terms of the Battle of the Last Alliance, the showdown at Mount Doom, what happens with the ring, we need to see Isildur develop and just see what his view is of elves. And I don't have a view one way or another. And this leads me on to the other listener question we got, which was from Emmy fan JUM, which I think is Middle-earth fan Jun, who says, it seems Isildur will join with the Southlanders this season, who I'm sure will become the people of Gondor in the future. Right. What specific event or events do you think will make the Southlanders to follow Isildur as their leader instead of Halbrand? I'll try and answer this one from my perspective first, because I don't know if you've got a different view. I don't think the Southlanders are going to follow Isildur as their leader. I think perhaps they will learn to respect him, and they will perhaps view Númenorians as a people differently, because for all the men of Middle-earth see Númenorians, they're just this kingdom across the sea who are, they've been blessed with long life, they've been blessed with all these gifts, and the men of Middle-earth have kind of been left in Middle-earth without any of that. So I don't think they are naturally going to follow him. And that is an interesting question, though, about instead of Halbrand, there is, of course, the question of will Sauron go to Pelargir in his Halbrand form? Obviously, they still think of him as king of the Southlands. So lots we don't know there. But no, I don't think Isildur is going to be seen as a leader this season. I think it's very much laying the groundwork for the kingdoms in exile, and if you're asking why would the Southlanders follow the exiled Númenorians following the Akalabeth, well, that gets into some of the more interesting conversations you can have about whether the Númenorians, even the faithful, are pretty much just doing a fair bit of colonization when they end up in Middle-earth post the fall of Númenor. So a conversation for another season and another year. But do you have anything else you want to add on that one?
No, I think I'm pretty much on the same page as you. I think he'll build relationships, garner respect, like you said, but he does go back to Númenor. He doesn't become the king of Gondor right now. So there's time for him to build those relationships with the land, with the people, and he kind of sets the stones for his return. But I can't imagine anyone kind of flocking to him as a ruler of any sort. I think this season will be about him learning to be a ruler, or kind of gaining some of that knowledge so that when he goes back to Númenor, he's kind of prepared for those responsibilities.
Yeah, I agree with you. Is there anything else you want to? I mean, I think we're both just very excited. Listen, especially now that we know we're not getting more of Arondir and Bronwyn's love story. Can I tell you, I'm just really bloody excited for. And you know what it is? It's going to be a romance which is which is going to be, at least for a time, it's going to be happy, it's going to be positive, it's not going to be toxic, it's not going to be based on betrayal or deceit, it's not going to be an invented ship that the fandoms come up with, which is fine. I have no problem with people shipping, but it will be really nice just to see what these canonical romance, and actually, because Tolkien couldn't be bothered to write any women's names or stories when it came to the Númenóreans beyond Miriel. I'm just really excited to see what Estrid is like, how she challenges Isildur, how she impacts him, and how he impacts her. And there's obviously that very, as it says in the article, the very lovely picture of the two of them, I think, just about to kiss, really, if we're, to put it bluntly. So I'm very excited.
Yeah. Me too. I think I'm on the same page as you. I'm excited for the love story. I'm excited because we're almost kind of getting the reverse of Isildur within Estrid. I mean, Isildur's in this kind of strange place that he doesn't know, but eventually, if Estrid is the future queen, he'll take her back to Númenor. She'll kind of be acquainted with that culture, which I think will be really interesting to see. And it'll be nice to see her kind of gain those responsibilities as well, if she is to be queen one day. So I think both characters have a lot coming for them in the next few seasons, but I do agree that just kind of a nice, simple love story is something that's good, and it's not going to touch on those, points of immortality, because obviously it's two humans, regardless of one of them is Númenorian, but it is two humans having this romance. So I think it's nice, it's simple. Fingers crossed. A lot of people are expecting some sort of bait and switch, so who knows?
I mean, I'm still open to the idea that she might actually be a Númenorian, and that could be the secret she's hiding, that she's, maybe descended from Númenorian colonists, or she left Númenor for some reason. I think that would be super interesting if they went that route. But equally, I like the idea of her being of the men of Middle Earth, and what that, as you kind of said, tells us about Isildur's future and his story. So, no, I'm just really looking forward to it. And, he's hoping that we get a good old-fashioned rom-com involving Isildur, because he was quite a funny character in season 1, so we could do with a bit of lightness in season 2 as well.
I think that'll be good. I think as well, him and Arondir have the potential to be a really good duo. I mean, an elf-human duo is always good, so I think there'll be a bit of darkness, seriousness, but I do feel that there's the potential for some kind of light, heartfelt moments between the three of them, which I think will be quite nice.
Well, we get that great picture of Isildur clearly having fallen into like a puddle of mud or a bog, and Arondir having to help him out and just looking a bit annoyed about the fact he's having to drag this human out of the mud. And then also there's the great line from Maxim in that interview with IGN where he says, "We become the policemen of Plagir," which immediately caused me to edit his and Ismail's faces onto the poster of Hot Fuzz. So I'm just imagining it as a sort of Middle-earth spin-off to Hot Fuzz. No luck catching them spiders then. Okay, I'm done.
I mean, that could be like a Tom Bombadil quote.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, moving on. Thank you, Anna. You've really ruined my joke.
Actually, I'm going to ruin your mood again. There's one more thing that I want to mention about Isildur and Estrid is, if we get Beric back in this season, do we think Estrid's going to have to pass the kind of does Beric approve of you test?
Who cares? It's a horse. Who cares whether the horse approves? It's a horse. Give it a carrot and tell it to move on.
Isildur cares. Elendil cares. Aragorn cares, and therefore I care.
I don't know how every time we do this podcast we have to have an argument based on, the horse girl faction versus, the normal people faction.
Normal people?
Well, Well, I'm just saying, I don't have that particular brain rot, and I think that makes me, in some ways, more normal than people that talk about horses as if, anyway, I'm not going to denigrate horses anymore because I feel like I'm just getting in trouble every time I speak about them. Do you want to have a bet about... No, you know what? We've had one bet. I was going to start a bet about whether Beric dies, but we'll save that for another day.
Okay, we can do that one another time.
All right, well, we've already been going for quite a while, so let's move on to our final piece of news and update, which is, I don't want to say the biggest, because I think, in a way, it didn't have any huge character reveals, but perhaps it gave us some of the most substantive insight into season 2, the plot, some of the core storylines. So, of course, this was the Empire Rings of Power feature. Much like I said in season 1, they took over Empire magazine. This time, last year, we got 3 covers. We got the Galadriel one, we got the Harfoots one, and there was one more, and I'm trying to remember what the third cover was for last year. Do you remember what it was? It was Galadriel. It was the Harfoots. Was it the dwarves? Yes, it was Durin and Disa.
It was the dwarves, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, they were like, yeah.
Sitting at their dinner table with the big chairs. Yeah. So last season, we got those 3 covers. This season, we got these covers, which are the ones where, as you look at them and they move, the image changes. And we got one of Galadriel, one of her in this beautiful green gown with a golden kind of flower laurel around her head, looking very serene, very, kind of Lady of Lorien. And then as you turn it, you get Galadriel in her I'm off to go and hunt Sauron form, holding a sword, a quiver full of arrows over her back, and looking like she's ready to kick ass. And then the other cover we got, which I think was the one that people were in a way more excited for, is on one version of the cover, you have poor old dirty human Halbrand, who Anna hates, and Anna spat on the cover and said, oh, why have they done this? But then as you turn it, you get Charlie in his Annatar form with the beautiful long blonde hair, this very gorgeous but simple silver robe, very kind of, well, we can get into the costume and all of that later. But yeah, so we got those 2 covers. And then inside the magazine, we got a huge feature with information on everything from Annatar and Celebrimbor to Galadriel, the Barrow wights, which we saw in the trailer. We got a double interview with Morvith and Charlie as well, which isn't that insightful, but for those of you who like hearing about actors' thoughts on things and their views on Lego, for example, you might enjoy that. But yeah, I will say this was as good, if not better, than the Empire takeover they did 2 years ago. And I have my copy here with the Galadriel cover, because I don't really want to see Halbrand or Annatar's face every day. Just not for me. But so that's where we are. And I should say that in the week or week and a half leading up to the magazine release, they teased some of the stuff that was going to be in it. So they teased little quotes and pictures. So we got pictures of Galadriel. We got pictures, as I said, of the Barrow wights. We got pictures of a certain troll that Anna is very excited to be talking about. But we're not going to talk about all of those yet, because, of course, the biggest thing we got from this from this feature and from the images leading up to it was, of course, our first look at Charlie Vickers as Annatar in his, angelic Maiar Lord of Gifts costume. Anna, let's just go straight there. What did you think of the Annatar costume, his look, everything? What was your first impression?
See, my first impression, which I did tweet about, was that he looks exactly like Galadriel, which obviously it just made me laugh because on the covers they had the exact same colour scheme. He has this long blonde hair. Just makes me laugh, the thought of him kind of having this fight with her and then immediately being like, I am her now.
Yes. But, if you can't be with her, be her.
Be her, exactly. But he looks incredible. And the 2 things that I've noticed from the costumes we have for him this season is that they're kind of balancing out between the snake imagery and the angel imagery that they're using. They're kind of doing both for him, which I find really interesting, because it's, in the Empire magazine, he's described, they say Sauron is a seducer and a deceiver, and it feels like they're really incorporating both of those things into his costume, which I really like. I mean, one of the images that we got is kind of almost from a downwards angle, and he's shot with this light emanating from behind him, and there's almost this image of angel wings behind him, which I found it was just such a striking picture.
Some people said butterfly wings, which is an interesting interpretation as well.
I saw that and I can see it, but in my mind it was more angelic than it was
Butterfly.
insecty. But yeah, I really like that. And at the same time, they've kind of stuck with the snake imagery as well. I mean, there's a shot of him in Celebrimbor, and he's wearing this kind of snake-like barrette in his hair, which is really interesting. But I think the costuming has always been really good for the Rings of Power. But I love what they've done this season, and I like that what they're conveying through the costumes as well.
Yeah, what I love about his costume is the simplicity. And I think, and I totally get it, by the way, so I'm not denigrating anyone that thought this, I think a lot of people's headcanon was that when Sauron shows up as Annatar, because he's the Lord of Gifts, so gifts, you think, giving, you think, riches, you think, all these images. I can imagine that a lot of people think he would turn up in, kind of gold silk robes and wearing a million rings and pieces of jewelry. And I have to admit, my brain kind of went there as well. But as soon as I thought it, I thought, no, of course this is how he'd look, because the Annatar form is meant to be, yes, he's kind of telling the truth that he's a Maiar, he's one of the servants of the Valar, but of course, when we see other servants of the Valar, we see the Astari, who are all dressed in sort of not tatty robes, but plain robes, simple robes, robes of service. There's almost a priestly aspect to them when you think about Gandalf, Saruman, Radagast, whoever you think about. There is that simplicity in it, and I think it's the simplicity of service. And so I love this idea that, yes, he's coming as a Lord of Gifts, but he's coming with an air of humility. His belt is just a simple, around his waist is just a simple cord rope belt. His cloak, yes, it's got some lovely embroidery. Embroidery? Let's try embroidery, whichever you prefer. But it's got this beautiful embroidery down the lapels, and it's got these beautiful kind of weaving patterns that are very similar to his dark costume that we saw in the trailer. And so I just love this idea that he might be the Lord of Gifts, but again, as you said, he's a seducer, he's a manipulator, he's a deceiver. And so, of course, he's not going to come in with a show of gold and glam and glitz, because that's just so anti-Tolkienian in kind of the ideas of, I thought a servant of the enemy would look, the whole look fairer, seem fairer idea that's touched on in Fellowship of the Ring. So I love the costume, and that will obviously link to these pieces in the notes for the episode. But that picture of him standing across from Celebrimbor, I mean, I can't really explain how I feel about it, but I feel great about it. And just the way, if you zoom in and look at Celebrimbor's face, Celebrimbor's enraptured by him. He's almost got this kind of entranced look on his face, and he's wearing this beautiful red robe as well. God, I could talk for hours about that. But, Annatar has this kind of almost calm, serene look on his face, and Celebrimbor just looks enthralled by him, and I'm so excited.
It's so good. And I love the way they do visual storytelling, or what I've seen from it this season, because in that picture alone, you have their expressions, but you also have Celebrimbor's face is like bathed in this bright light, and then Annatar's face is like bathed in shadow. And it's just that like really little piece of visual storytelling. It's so good. It's so good.
And obviously, we know this scene is all the scene we saw in the trailer of the light in Celebrimbor's new forge, of the figure walking through it. And so we obviously knew that this was going to be that. It was obvious that's what they were doing. But now seeing it, you just get a real sense of what this scene might be like. And just to pick up on some of those quotes we got, I want to touch on a few more of those quotes. So the first one, this gets to the kind of appearance point. Charlie Vickers said, "Everything Sauron does is to serve other people, to appeal to someone else. In the same way the whole Halbrand thing was for Galadriel, this new look is for Celebrimbor." So that's one quote. And then we get this other quote from Patrick McKay, one of the showrunners, saying, "The two Charlies go places I think people will be surprised by. It's almost a psychological thriller. The noose is tightening more and more." I mean, you guys will have heard me talk about my hopes for Celebrimbor and Annatar this season. You know how much I love this story from the books and how important Celebrimbor's story is to me in particular. And I've got to be honest, while we all had nerves after how last season kind of sidelined Celebrimbor, I mean, this is just getting me so excited.
I think, every quote that has come out of these past few articles has just raised my confidence like even more each time. And I really do like the bit where they said about this look is for Celebrimbor. because that is kind of what Sauron the Deceiver does. He finds someone, knows exactly what they want or need in that moment of time, and he becomes that. And they referred to him, I think it's in the Empire article, as an Old Testament prophet,
Yes.
which I think is really interesting. And that also ties into that sort of angel imagery. And I like that they just kind of have these visions of the character in mind while they're going through it. And, one of the things we spoke about before the first trailer came out was that we were a bit worried that the showrunners didn't quite realize how big of a part Celebrimbor had to play in season 2. And I'm going to reference the Total Film article as well now, which came out, I think, a few days before the Empire.
Yeah, it was just a short one-page. The reason we haven't covered that in depth, guys, is because it's a short one-pager and we can tie it into everything in Empire. So don't worry, the bit about the dwarves we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah, so in the Total Film article, they describe Celebrimbor as becoming the principal protagonist, and that the relationship between him and Sauron becomes the central relationship. And then again in the Empire article, it's described as the spine of the season. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really all I needed to hear to know that we're on the right track with them. I feel like the right amount of emphasis is kind of being put on them. And, the pictures that we've seen, the descriptions that we've seen, what we saw in the trailer, I know that this is going to be my favorite part of season 2. I know it, and I'm just so excited.
I think the other bit from that Total Film that I love is when they say, but as much as the conflict between good and evil gets bigger in scope this season, it also becomes more intimate. And this bit I love. What's arguably the central relationship of the season between Sauron and Celebrimbor is all about temptation, manipulation, and corruption. It's a descent into madness. So as much as it's a bigger season in terms of scope, with epic action, dark sorcery, and hordes of evil creatures, it's also a more personal and psychological one. And I'll just refer to something I posted on Twitter. One of my favorite TV shows of the last 20 years that I think is so underrated. It's not even underrated because it was critically acclaimed, but a lot of people just didn't see it. Was Hannibal, the TV series, with Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal Lecter. Have you seen it, Anna, by the way?
I've never seen it.
You would. It is so up your street. Like, I cannot even begin to. I'm not joking. It is like you would. In fact, my only thing I ask of you, Anna, is before we get to season 2, you have to watch it because you'll love it. I promise.
Okay,
but
I'll give it a go.
At the core of the Hannibal TV show is the relationship between Hannibal Lecter, who is a practicing therapist, kind of psychotherapist, and Will Graham, who consults for the police department, for the FBI, I should say. And it is obviously about this idea that, Hannibal is doing everything he does, murdering people, eating them, etc. And it's beautifully shot. That's besides the point. But the point is, the central relationship in that show is about Hannibal and Will. And Hannibal's obviously trying to lead Will away from ever suspecting him, but it's also about manipulating him and tempting him and messing with his mind. And there's this very specific idea that Hannibal touched on, this idea of someone who you look up to and trust and feel safe with, who then starts to gaslight you and manipulate you and warp your sense of reality. And it's a very abusive relationship, but it gets into seduction and temptation, which is at the core of the Annatar and Celebrimbor story. And let me just say something. I know for a lot of fans, and this includes me as well, by the way, so I want to be very clear about that. I know for a lot of fans, when they look at the Annatar Celebrimbor relationship, they feel there should be a romantic or a sexual or an intimate element between that. I have no expectation the show will go there. Part of that is because it is a show produced by $1 billion corporation, which isn't going to take risks and isn't going to be that progressive. And you might say that's just cynical, but that's just me accepting what media is. I have no expectation of that. And also, I just don't think it's the tendency of these two showrunners. And that's not my critique of them. That's just my analysis of their tendencies as artists. So, am I disappointed about that? In a sense, yes, because I do think that's a really I think that kind of queer reading of the Sauron and Celebrimbor relationship is really interesting. And it's one that I personally have a lot of interest in because I just think it adds another layer. But I don't think the show is going to do it. But here's what I'll say. I still think they can do absolute justice to the ideas of temptation and seduction and all of that without getting into that side of it. So that's just I just wanted to touch on that because I think that's something that can at times, and believe me, some people have really misinterpreted what I've said in the past, and made me made me out to be something I'm not. But I think it's important to acknowledge that while that is a popular fan interpretation, and I have a lot of interest in it as well, I would just like people to recognize it is highly unlikely the show touches on that in anything more than a wink and a nod.
I'm with you on the reading of their story. I think it's a lot more interesting within a queer context. And I think I agree with you. I don't think they're going to do that because I think that's probably why they gave the romantic, quote unquote, romantic aspect to Galadriel in season 1.
Which we don't like.
Yeah, we don't like
and to be fair, I think our view is very much that, like, it obviously wasn't a romantic relationship, but what they did was allow it to be interpreted that way by fans, which is fine. But, you know, I think we can also agree that there's a little bit of bitterness from fans and from, you know, people, including myself, that they probably won't allow the same room for Celebrimbor.
Yeah. And I don't think that they'll make their relationship romantic, but at the same time, I don't think that they're kind of skirting past that possibility. Yeah. And I think that it's interesting the way they've described it. You know, they've described it as intimate. They've described Sauron as a seducer in the context of his relationship with Celebrimbor, and also talked about the fact that his look is for Celebrimbor when you compare it to Galadriel in season 1. And listen, this can all be... this is just like kind of his character. This is what he does and who he is. But I think that they're going to give that very intimate aspect that is needed to their relationship, whether they make it romantic or not. And like you said, they probably won't. I think that the way they've described it so far can be read romantically. And it's just leaving it open for whoever's reading that. That's kind of how I read it. But that's maybe because I already read their relationship with that in mind, you know?
And I think... I actually want to revise one thing I said earlier, which is when I said that I don't think that is the showrunners and the writers. I don't think they would read it that way. That's not for me to say, actually. And I always tell people not to try and like critique what you think the writers' motivations are, because you're just making up a headcanon. You know, you're just going, well, I think the writers were motivated. And it's the same with the Galadriel stuff, where I'm like, it's fine if you read it romantically. I just have a problem with people saying, well, the writers, they were definitely doing this, and I know they want to do this, because you're doing projection. I don't think it's fair on the writers or the showrunners. So what I'll say is, I don't think they're going to go there, but I actually just want to revise my comments and say that, like, I shouldn't project onto them what I think of them. So I don't think that was very fair of me. The second thing I'll say about it, and maybe this will upset some people. Here's what I'll say. While I find the romantic, the kind of seduction in that sense of it, and that whole aspect of the queer reading of Sauron and Celebrimbor very interesting, how can I put this? I do have a problem with sometimes the way fandom portrays their relationship and tries to therefore make it look like it is not incredibly toxic and abusive and awful and horrible. And that's how, like, even if you're going to go do that, I do personally believe you have to acknowledge the fact that Sauron the whole time is abusing and manipulating and deceiving Celebrimbor. And obviously we know what's going to happen at the end of their story, of this relationship the two of them have. And so I just think, like, it's important to recognize that this isn't some kind of woobified, you know, like, oh, that, you know, there's true love between them. No, like, it is. And that's why I compare it to Hannibal and Will Graham. And I know a lot of our viewers won't have seen it, but if you do, you'll know what I'm talking about, which is, like, even if you want to see, in inverted commas, love in it,
Is their ship name Hannigram? Because I think I've seen it before.
Yeah. Going back to my old Tumblr days, I know all about Hannigram. The edits were great. But I guess what I'm getting at is, like, and to your point, you kind of touched on this as well, like, I hope they notice it. That would be my hope for them, because, like I said, I don't have expectations beyond that, just because I don't think Amazon is the type of company will make that kind of progressive art. And maybe that's me judging them too harshly. I don't know.
I mean, I know I'm with you on that, because didn't they, this might be something that I've just read on the timeline somewhere, but didn't they kind of come out and say that one of the elves in season 1 was like canonically queer, but it's an elf that we saw for like 2 seconds?
No,
I remember reading that somewhere, and I was just like, really?
No, I don't think the showrunner said. Do you know what I think that is? I think that's a parody of something that one of the Star Wars creators said about. It was like in the third of the new, what do they call them? The sequels, yeah, the third of the new sequels, where like there's a background character in one scene who's a woman who kisses another woman, and they were like, it's Star Wars' first canonical gay couple. It's like, yeah, you haven't done anything there. You know, you've just put queer people as set dressing. So, you know, which in a way, like, I'm kind of like, I don't want the Rings of Power to do that. Like, if you're going to have queer characters, give them the respect that you would give to straight characters. So I wouldn't want them to do that anyway. But yeah, so like, I don't think they're going to do it. But as we've said, I think they can still do it. And hey, listen, that's what fan fiction is for. And I have a lot of love for fan art, fan fiction. So I think that's where we've got to remind ourselves that is why fan art and fan creativity is so good, because where a corporate production isn't going to take risks, you get to do that and you get to have total freedom. But like you said, I think there is still an opportunity for them, and listen, in their own words, they've described it as intimate. They've described it as about seduction, about manipulation. So I'd like people to keep an open mind, but I'm just letting people know where I am, in that I don't think they're going to go all the way, and I'm okay with that because I never expected them to.
I agree. I mean, the only thing that I have left to say on this is that I remember when Celebrimbor's casting was first announced, and one of the reasons, like, a lot of people didn't like it was because they couldn't imagine like an Annatar-esque character falling in love with him. And may I just say that speaking from my perspective, completely disagree, because I have been charmed by Charles Edwards already, and I am very much in love with him. So
yeah, I mean,
you can all go away.
Yeah, I mean, I think people know where I stand on Charles Edwards, which is, you know, and like this. I want to touch on that as well, actually, because a lot of this does come back to what you just talked about there. That I got really angry and a little bit upset, actually, about the way people spoke about Charles Edwards, because I just think it's just I'm not going to swear, but it is just rubbish ageism. And this idea that, like, in order, you know, even if they were to go down the route of there being a romantic or intimate connection between them, the idea that we can't do that if, you know, Charles Edwards is an older man, you know, it really, really irritates me, because it's part of the way I see a lot of fandoms and online engagement with media going, which is like, it's not actually about the quality of the writing, and it's not about the characterization or the acting. It's like, oh, am I personally attracted to this actor and this character? And all I've got to say is, I don't care, because someone else might be, or no one might be. And it's just not important. It's not important whether you are personally attracted to an actor, and that should no way restrict writers from writing whatever kind of story they want to. And again, I don't think they're going to go there for all the reasons we've stated, but I think if you're bringing your own baggage, saying that, you know, because an actor is older or not attractive to you, I don't have any time for you, and I won't apologize for it. And if you think I'm kind of making some bigoted comment with that, well then, frankly, I think you've headcanoned an idea of me which is not representative. Anyway, I've got a lot of stored up anger over the last 2 years over stuff that's happened. But hey, listen, the point is that this has got me excited for Celebrimbor and Annatar. And I think I should be allowed to say that without people saying, oh, well, you know, they're not going to do justice to the most popular fan interpretation of their relationship. It's like, I understand that, and I agree with you, but that doesn't lessen my enjoyment for it. And all these quotes have me super excited for it. So yeah.
I agree, and I feel like I'm at a point now where I'm confident that they're being given the screen time and the emphasis that plot deserves. I do have one more point on Sauron, but this also ties into the Khazad Dûm, so I don't know if you want to kind of move on to that. But I believe in the Empire article we get the kind of confirmation that Sauron will be in Khazad-dûm at some point, or the rings will go to Khazad-dûm?
Yeah, so let's we can return if there's any more because we've got some more listener questions to get to as well. But because this Empire magazine is quite big, we'll try and split those up. So we've kind of touched on the main points about Sauron and Celebrimbor. The only other thing I want to add is there is a scene description in there because clearly the Empire reporters were on set, and I'll just read it out. And we don't need to comment on it because I think we know it's from the scene in the trailer of Celebrimbor, what looks like him trying to destroy the rings. But I'll just read it to you because I think it's tantalizingly good. With a soot-smeared, flame-lit face, Edwards hunches over an assortment of smithing paraphernalia and carefully handles a pot of what appears to be molten liquid. The cathedral-like Noldorin forge of Eregion towers around him, all looming pillars and stretching stained-glass windows, but it has clearly seen better days, looking battered and semi-derelict. Has there been an accident here? A battle? Given this is a scene from the season's penultimate episode, nobody is saying. But even though Sauron is personally absent, the pesky Maya's dark influence is palpable in Edward's troubled mien. I mean, God, if I needed any more to get me excited. I mean, I just can't wait to see Celebrimbor's new forge, let alone everything else. But I mean, God, that's got me excited. It does
sound like incredible. And actually, speaking of that, there is more that I wanted to say about it, which was the fact that they talk about kind of the final battle, and they talk about it being not just overnight, but over multiple days, weeks, months, and episodes. And I think we've known pretty much from the get-go that we were going to have a 2-episode long battle, but I really like the idea that they're really going to kind of stretch out the siege into, not weeks, months. So I think that the impact of those final 2 episodes are going to be just insane.
Yeah, and I think people have slightly misinterpreted this to mean like the battle's going to be going on all season and like, and that's how it's going to be on. I think what it's going to mean is like the last 2 or 3 episodes are going to take place over in showtime, weeks, if not months. And I think and to be honest, and I'm going to do an episode, I'm actually going to try and get our friend Sarah Westvick on to talk about the Siege of Eregion because they've got a lot of experience talking about military history and medieval sieges. So hopefully I'm going to do that before we get to season 2. But I think our first indication of that was when we've seen both scenes of, in the trailer, catapults firing flaming projectiles over the river, which is still there, and then later scenes where, in the behind the scenes, where elves and orcs appear to be running up to the walls and there's no river there. And so clearly the river is dammed up or drained at some point.
Yeah,
and
we get one as well. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you, but we get one as well, don't we, of Elrond in his armor, and behind him you can kind of see these ships that have clearly not in any water. They kind of look washed up.
No, people got confused about that. Those are just trebuchets.
What's a trebuchet?
It's a catapult.
Oh, okay.
But actually, if I say it's just a catapult, there are going to be some big nerds listening to this who are like, a trebuchet isn't a catapult. I'm just explaining it to Anna. I know they're slightly different, and I know there are real trebuchet stands out there, but just chill out for a second. Because I can feel them typing already in the comments going, a trebuchet is not just a catapult. But yeah, no, I mean,
Listen, I don't need to know the ins and outs of a trebuchet.
No, exactly. But the important point is that, and the point I'm getting to is, like you said, this idea of the battle lasting long, I think is important because a siege shouldn't be something that, by definition, the point of a siege is not to rock up and knock down the walls and then go in the next day. It is about building pressure and, and sieging and besieging an enemy. So I think we've had plenty of indications. Now, that will be a challenge for the show to do because anytime a show doesn't show time in a literal way, people go, as they used to do with Game of Thrones, which used to annoy me because you can critique Game of Thrones for lots of things, but one of the silliest ones was everyone's teleporting about over the place, to which I say, a minute in a TV show is not a minute in the show's world, just accept that they didn't want to show people on the road every episode. It's just boring. Anyway.
You see, I was going to bring up Game of Thrones as well, actually, because I think what you don't want from something like the Siege of Eregion is kind of a Battle of Winterfell thing that's built up and built up and built up, and then it lasts for one night. You can't have something like the Siege of Eregion just kind of over and done with in the snap of a finger.
Yes. The long night has never felt quite so short.
I know.
PTSD.
Winter is coming, and now winter is gone.
Yeah.
Great.
Anyway, let's not get too caught on this. You were going to take us on to, and we can combine, obviously, the once again, the Total Film article and the Empire one. I think you wanted to take us on to Sauron as Annatar and the Dwarves.
Yes. So I did kind of a brief look over of your summary of the Empire article.
And why have you had to do that, Anna?
Because, listen, I ordered the copies before they came out and they still haven't arrived because I was trying to be on top of things and get them delivered, but life doesn't work in the way that we want it to.
Do you know what I did? Because I'm just an old man on Thursday. I just after I voted in our UK general election, I walked to WH Smith and I bought a copy. It's these very modern fangled things called shops, and you can go in and you can buy magazines in them. So. Just an idea.
Well, anyway, I've been reading Harry's kind of second-hand interpretation of the magazine. So, from what I got from that, we will see Sauron go to Khazad-dûm. Whether he's going to kind of deliver the rings, forge the rings, whatever, we're going to see him there, which I think is really interesting, especially when we combine it with the fact that there's this kind of blight now upon Khazad-dûm, similar to what we saw in Lindon in season 1. And the thing that I took the most out of this was actually the fact that Disa loses her connection to the mountain, which I think is a really interesting point.
Yeah, so I think, and I'll get the relevant section of the magazine because it's worth probably reading it in full for our listeners. Because obviously, in my Twitter thread, I just summarized some of the key quotes because I'm not going to take pictures of the whole magazine because that's just stupid. And also, as someone who believes in print media, I don't want people not to go and buy the magazine. I know people be like, I should have it for free. But guess what? If you don't pay for the magazines, you don't get an Empire feature on Rings of Power. So all I'm saying is go and support print media. So this is the quote about the dwarves. The question will also weigh on the minds of the dwarves who dwell beneath the misty mountains in Khazad-dûm, a location that has expanded significantly for Season 2, as we discover while exploring its impressively cavernous new throne room constructed from the ground up, or rather down, on the stage next door. There is a sickness on the land of Khazad-dûm, reveals Pain of the dwarves' plight. They lose not only the physical light that allows them to grow food, but also the spiritual light that keeps them in tune with the mountain. This is particularly bad news for Disa, played by Sophia Nonvetti, better half of Dwarven Prince Durin Owain Arthur. She has a supernatural power to connect and speak to the mountain, and that completely fractures, says Nonvetti. That, for her, is absolutely terrifying and soul-destroying. She tries to keep strong, keep defiant, but we start to see an air of desperation creeping in, which can sometimes cloud our judgment. End quote. The perfect situation for a certain false-faced malefactor to exploit. Quote, Sauron is going to prey upon these problems, says Pain. He's going to say, hey, I've got an answer. I've got 7 rings for you.
It's just, it makes perfect sense. And in my mind, you can kind of theorize about where this sickness upon Khazad-dûm came from. Probably from Sauron himself.
Yeah.
He's going to create the problem and then he's going to magically have this solution to fix it. And I think taking someone's connection away from the place they live sounds like something Sauron would do because he knows the desperation that could cause. And I think, especially for someone like Disa who has this kind of really natural connection, or supernatural as they called it, with the mountains, that's like kind of having half of your life ripped away. And on top of that, you have obviously Durin's relationship with his father is also fractured in that sense. So there's just so much kind of tension within Khazad-dûm at the moment. And it's just, he's set the groundwork for himself perfectly. He has Celebrimbor on one side, the dwarves on the other side. He's set himself up for a perfect run this season.
Yeah, and I think obviously in the behind the scenes video, the same day as the trailer, we got that shot of Celebrimbor and Prince Durin in what looked like Khazad-dûm because the architecture in the background looked very, very dwarvish. So I think clearly Celebrimbor and Sauron as Annatar are going to go to Khazad-dûm probably after the 7 rings are forged. So I'm thinking this is probably midway through the season, maybe episode 3, episode 4, something like that. And I think it'll be very interesting to see whose idea it is. I wonder whether Annatar is going to say, you used to have this great relationship with the dwarves, and then Elrond and Gil-galad ruined it. They're so wise, but they ruined it. Let me help you repair it. And we talked about this a lot, didn't we, in our analysis of the trailer, this idea of how is Narvi going to play into this? Celebrimbor's dwarven friend who he helps build the Doors of Doran with. How's that going to interact with Annatar in season 2? And obviously this is backed up in part canonically in the books by in the appendices, the idea that at least one of the 7 dwarven rings was given to King Durin before Eregion, what happens to Eregion, and before Sauron takes the rest of the rings post that. So I think obviously they're going with that interpretation, which I think is perfectly fine. Now, there'll be a question about whether all 7 are going to be given pre the Siege of Eregion. I don't think so. There's the shot in the trailer where we see King Doran picking up one of the rings. In the shot at the bottom, you can see there's at least 2 other rings there. So maybe 3 get brought to Khazad-dûm, maybe all 7, and he just gives one to Doran. Who knows? I guess we're not going to know at this point, because obviously the rest of the rings are meant to end up with the other dwarf kingdoms and dwarf kings and lords, so maybe we're not going to see all those distributed this season. But I agree with you. I think this idea of there being a corruption, a blight of the home, which I agree with you 100%, it's got to do. I mean, maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're just being too predictable here. But I do think, again, going back to that Adar quote from season 1, some lies run so deep, even the rocks and the roots now believe them. Listen, in season 1, we saw the roots of Lindon believe these lies. And in season 2, I think we're going to see the rocks believe these lies, i.e. the dwarves. And I love this idea that Disa is going to have her faith in herself, her spirituality, because the dwarves' spirituality and religion is connected to the rocks themselves. So I love this idea that Sauron is going to prey on that. And obviously there was that shot from the behind the scenes video of Disa holding what looked like the Palantir. So again, is that one of the gifts Sauron brings? I mean, this has me, like we said earlier, I think there's a good chance that season 2, as well as being about Sauron and Celebrimbor, is going to be about the dwarves and the 7 rings quite centrally to the story. And I'm very excited by this.
Me too. I mean, one of the things I remember saying before we got the trailer was that I was a bit worried about the dwarven plot being kind of put on the back burner for this season. That very clearly isn't the case. And I think there's just so many interesting things that could happen this season. You have Sauron going in, and I do wonder what form he'll go in as. I mean, I've always been a believer since the start that he'll go to Celebrimbor in his Annatar form, and he'll do the same with the dwarves. I know a lot of people think that he won't reveal himself as Annatar until one of the last episodes in the season, which I don't think is going to happen, because they've put out so much promotional material now of him as Annatar. It doesn't feel like they do that as kind of a surprise. So I do feel like he's going to go as Annatar to Khazad-dûm.
Oh, 100%.
And I think he's kind of sowed this sickness into Khazad-dûm. He's fractured the dwarven connection with it. And I think that, when we first saw the picture of Disa holding the Palantir, we were a bit like, okay, where has that come from? What's going to happen? But if he's kind of sown these seeds within Khazad-dûm and then comes in with the Palantir, which could potentially show them the destruction of Khazad-dûm, that's only going to kind of further get him what he wants. We saw the shot in the trailer of, I think it was like the stones falling onto the bridge and causing it to collapse. And whether that's something that she sees as a vision, something that actually happens, we don't know. But I think it's a very interesting season for the dwarves.
Yeah, I think when we watched the trailer, I think I was pretty adamant that was a vision. After reading this feature, I'm not so sure. I think the rocks might be getting loose under their feet, and one thing we should touch on as well when it comes to the dwarves is King Durin. Obviously, we ended season 1 with this strained relationship, and in the Total Film article, we get this quote about it. Where the showrunners say, season 2 sees a fractured relationship between King Durin and his son take on a similar larger dimension. They reference the recurring mythological motif around a king's failing health leading to a sickness in the land that endangers the entire kingdom. And they go on to say, just as the king has become deaf to the pains of his own son, the dwarves have lost their ability to hear the mountain. This precarious position makes them ripe targets for Sauron's offer of dwarven rings and as a panacea. But it all comes at a price. King Durin's sanity. As the ring stokes his greed, it drives the wedge between father and son deeper, ultimately bringing them to the brink of a split that may have greater consequences than any threat they have faced thus far. Darkness really has come to Middle-earth. I'm very interested. I mean, I think we kind of predicted a lot. I don't think any of this came as a shock to us. Like, we saw King Doran wearing the Ring of Trail. We saw the shot in the behind the scene of him with this pile of gold. You know, I don't think either of us are surprised by any of this. If anything, it's just reassuring. It's just me reading this going, yeah, good. The show's doing what it should be with the dwarves and the rings. This is fine.
Yeah, it's very reassuring, and I think it really sets up Durin Junior. Sorry, I'm like the numbers elude me sometimes.
Yeah,
but Prince Durin, it sets up his kind of role in this season really well, I think. I mean, I know one of the things that we theorized about is that at the end of the season, he is going to kind of come to the aid of the elves in Eregion. And I think that if you spent kind of a larger part of this season watching the effect that Annatar has had upon Khazad-dûm and more specifically on his father with the ring, I think that's going to drive him more to provide that aid because he's kind of seen these effects firsthand. So I think that's going to be really good to watch that play out. And listen, poor Durin, but
yeah.
Annatar's coming and calling.
I just want to bring in a listener question at this point, which I think we've largely touched on, but there's just one interesting point in this. So this is from Non Sequitur Girl at Cruising Cathy on Twitter, who I believe is a staffer at theonering.net, and who I've always had lovely interactions with on Twitter, who says, dwarves and the whole thing about Sauron possibly already there and the light vanishing. I'm worried that the timeline to put them into panic mode is a bit early. We can't have them closing their doors to the outside world if they haven't actually built the back door yet. So my thoughts on this, and I've kind of already touched on this, I don't think it's going to be a binary thing where like they get the rings, they shut out the outside world, they retreat inwards. I think the important thing here as well is about the divide between King Durin and Prince Durin. And I think that's going to be the thing. King Durin might want to shut the doors, but apparently he's got failing health. And Prince Durin obviously has great love for Elrond. He has great love. I think in season 1, he actually developed a bit of empathy and understanding for the elves in general as well. And obviously, for those who've read the books, you know the role the dwarves play at the Siege of Eregion. So, no, I'm not as worried as Non Sequitur Girl, just because I don't think we should think of the dwarves homogeneously, like as just one unit. I think we should think about the way the different dwarves are going to react to these issues. I don't know if you agree.
No, I completely agree with you. I think they've made they've caused a very clear split between King Durin and Prince Durin. One that was there, by the end of season 1. You have Disa herself say that, one day this will be your kingdom to rule. I'm completely paraphrasing there, but she says something along those lines. And that thought is already going to be in their minds. And I think that he's going to almost act as kind of the antithesis to his father, because his father's going to be, at the mercy of the ring, at greed, everything like this. So I think the things that his father does, he's going to sort of do the opposite. So if his father shuts people out, Durin is going to want to go out and kind of make allies and kind of aid people. So I think I agree with you. The dwarves aren't all going to do the same thing, and they shouldn't be kind of seen as one singular unit. There's going to be divides, and as I said in this, there's fractured relationships, and I think that's going to play a huge part in who they interact with outside of Khazad-dûm.
Agreed. Just a couple more questions from listeners on Sauron as Annatar, Eregion, the dwarves, all that, and then we'll move on to Galadriel and the other elves, which have featured a little bit in this write-up as well. Katie Husby asks, I would like your opinion on the fan theory that Sauron went to Eregion as Annatar and made all the other rings of power before he met Galadriel on the raft as Halbrand. Celebrimbor didn't recognize him in Halbrand form. He returns as Annatar right before the sack. No, I don't like that at all. I mean, listen, I'm open to the idea that Sauron has been influencing the elves in some way, whether it's he was directly responsible for the blight on the trees, whether it's, I think people have taken that he's been here amongst us all along a little too literally. I don't think Sauron has been to Eregion as Annatar prior to season 2. I think mainly it's not good to treat your audience like that. And
yeah.
It would undermine everything that we see in season 2, I think.
I mean, I guess I could see his influence being there before he arrives with Celebrimbor. You know, this blight on Khazad-dûm isn't going to appear overnight. It's something that's kind of going to kind of slowly make itself known. So whether he's kind of planned that earlier, he's made his influence known there, but I don't think he will have visited himself in Halbrand or Annatar form. I don't think it would really make sense in the story.
The bit of this that I would really push back on is this idea, even if you want to go for the theory that Sauron's been in Eregion before, this idea that he could have been there and made all the other rings of power before he met Galadriel, absolutely not, because they don't. He isn't even the first one to suggest rings. In fact, it is important that it's Galadriel who suggests making the three. Yes, obviously, the whole thing that Halbrand was there when they went from going for a crown to rings. But the point is, we have to see the rings being made. It would be so.
Yeah.
I would stop watching the show if they didn't show the rest of the rings being made, and we're just like, oh, he actually made them all before, and we got a flashback. Like, I would stop watching the show.
Listen, in a show called The Rings of Power, you have to give adequate story time and storytelling to the Rings of Power. You can't just have them made as a flashback.
It's like when people say, like, oh, I think that's what's in Halbrand's pouch he's carrying. He's got the rings of power. It's like, no. Like, I get the mystery, and I get why, and I'm not being patronizing people. I do get why people are like, oh, there must be something in there. And I'm fine if there was some significance to the pouch. I don't personally think there was beyond the sigil. But it's not the rings in there. Otherwise, what's the point of doing the show at all? It'd be like if he'd already made the one ring. Like, well, just...
It's like... I don't know how to, I feel like I'm gonna sound really mean when I say this, but I genuinely mean this in like a nice way, because
I've been really mean this whole episode, so people are gonna hate me after this.
Because I do this myself sometimes, but I think sometimes people have a problem with basic storytelling, and they have to kind of find something more, or they have to think of this big structural kind of diversion, when it's like he comes and he makes the 3 rings, and then he makes the 7 rings, and then he makes the 9 rings, and that's fine. There doesn't need to be any diversion of, oh, he did this before, or he was here before, or he was here. It's okay if that doesn't happen. You know, if there's just this one simple kind of line that we follow him on to make the rings, then that's okay.
And in a way, they already did the twist. That was season 1 with him as Halbrand. Yes. That was where they diverted from the story. To do it again would be like, it wouldn't even be fun because we've already had one. No. So, Katie, to be clear, very much not trying to be patronizing or rude to you in any way. It's just, I think this is an idea that Anna and I really both don't like, and it's not in any way trying to demean you or anyone else who believes it. It's just like that is
if something. It happened.
Yeah, if it happened, I would viscerally dislike it. Okay, and one last question on Sauron as Annatar before we move on to Galadriel. Viscountess Lisa at Lisa Buckland asks, hi, I wondered what your thoughts are on the accent Charlie Vickers will use for Sauron/Annatar. I'm intrigued to know. It has to be different than his Halbrand form. Yeah, I've seen people talk about this because, as a lot of people have tried to describe it, Halbrand's accent in season 1 is kind of Charlie doing what I would describe, and maybe this is because I'm from the Midlands and you're from the Northwest, so you'll get what I mean here when I say this, even though I don't really have my accent anymore because I lived in the South for like 10 years. But there is a thing actors do where if they're playing a Northern character, it's like the accent could be anywhere from Leeds to Manchester to Liverpool. Like, it's just kind of, you know, it's kind of a blob accent where they're like,
it's like Northern TM.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not. By the way, I'm not having a go at Charlie's. I'm not having a go at Charlie's voice work. I don't think it was meant to be a Yorkshire accent or a Lancashire accent or whatever. Like, I think he was just going for, and I think that's fine. Like, I have no problem. He doesn't need to have a specific dialect. As for what he's going to do as Annatar, I would be very shocked if it isn't your classic RP broadcast, English Southern, kind of very well spoken. I mean, is there a chance it's anything else? I
mean, it does make me laugh if we kind of frame this in the context of the Empire magazine, where it says, he kind of molded the whole identity of Halbrand for Galadriel. And I like that he kind of like thought of Galadriel and was like, okay, she wants this kind of raggedy, dirty man with a very thick northern accent. That is what she wants to see within me.
Yeah.
That just kind of makes me laugh. But I agree. I think his accent as Halbrand was fine, but I do agree that he's going to go for this very kind of typical I don't even know how I would describe it. Just if you think
It's
of
the
someone
RP,
from
isn't
the
it?
south of England, yeah.
It's the RP. It's the broadcast voice. It's the BBC presenter voice.
And listen, I think that will work for Annatar. It's classic, it's villainous, and
Yeah.
it's charismatic at the same time, you know. But I do think he gave the accent he did as Halbrand. He made it very charismatic as well, which I liked.
100%. Like I said, I don't have a problem with it. It is just very generic, and I think equally his accent for Annatar will be generic. Kind of, it might even be quite stage actor in a way, like you know what I mean, kind of quite
Yeah.
thespian,
Yeah, I mean,
Shakespearean
he might
delivery.
take a leaf out of Rory's book and just go full on like Cornish or something.
I mean,
Who
listen,
knows?
listen. You know, seeing as you're on the podcast, if he would like to have a go at a Scouse Annatar, then you know that I think we'd all like to see.
That would be absolutely incredible. If he came out with a full on Scouse accent as Annatar, I would cry happy tears. I
I
mean, it
know.
would probably be. Listen, I couldn't imagine how that would play out. But listen, we need more Scouse people in Middle Earth.
No, I agree, and it's a lot like watching Peaky Blinders, which I know is very popular in America. But like, I have to say, as someone who I didn't grow up, I wasn't born around Birmingham. I was more in the East Midlands, Derbyshire way, but obviously very close to Birmingham. Knew a lot of people from Birmingham, and the accents in Peaky Blinders range from being very good Brummy accents to some really questionable accents, and I think that's the issue when like people try and do very specific. Although having watched England win the quarterfinals yesterday and famed Scouser Trent Alexander-Arnold scored the winning penalty, if he were to sound like Trent, I would absolutely love it.
See, it does make me laugh. Like, this is completely unrelated, but I don't know if you've ever kind of seen Jodie Comer do an interview, but she's one of my
Yes.
favourite actresses. But she's obviously got a very thick Scouse accent that she has to really, really tone down for like Americans to understand her. And it really makes me laugh.
Oh, exactly. It's like Jodie Comer, Saoirse Ronan, and her Irish accent. Like it really just
Yes.
bamboozles. Anyway, we've been going for like 3 hours, so we should get back on
Yes.
topic because we said this wasn't going to be as long an episode, and hopefully I'll edit it down. But here we are. We're just chronically yappers. Okay, let's move from Sauron, Annatar, and the dwarves to someone who we just have not talked about enough this episode. But frankly, it's because the news over the last month and a half hasn't really focused on her, although we've seen a lot of images of her, we should say. And that is, of course, Our Lady of Light, a wearer of Nenya, who we've now seen wearing Nenya in a lot of pictures, which is very exciting. That would, of course, be Galadriel herself. And in this article, we don't get too much. We get a couple of quotes. We get Morvith Clark, and let me just pull up the quote because I think it is. So yeah, let me just read the section from Morvith Clark talking about Galadriel, and this starts with Morvith Clark talking about Nenya. So. Galadriel, though hers is now complicated by the possession of Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings of power. Quote, even Sauron doesn't know exactly what they'll do, says Clark of these ominous trinkets, but it's an extra weird connection between Galadriel and the baddest man in Middle-earth. End quote. And then she says, talking about last season, she really messed up so badly. There's a desperation to redeem herself, and through redeeming herself, protect Middle-earth, which is in more danger than it has ever been. Now she's seen the whites of the eyes of the person who's bringing it down. She's all revved up. Now, I've got to say, I think this realigns with what we've been talking about in past episodes. This idea that, yes, she feels like she messed up. Yes, she feels like she's still on a revenge mission. But what I thought was so telling here, she said, there's a desperation to redeem herself, and through redeeming herself, protect Middle-earth. It is about stopping Sauron, but it's not about stopping Sauron for her own personal vengeance. It's about protecting Middle-earth. So this has me very encouraged.
Me too, and I think we talked from kind of the get-go that season 2 would be about redemption for Galadriel. You know, she makes this huge mistake in season 1 that's because she's so blinded by that personal revenge she wanted, and that's kind of probably one of the reasons why she's broadened her horizons to this general protection for Middle-earth, which I think is really interesting. One of the other things I think is interesting is how being kind of a ring bearer will affect her character, if it will at all, in season 2. I mean, I know one of the things that she learned in season 1 was to kind of trust people and allow herself to kind of ally with people and let people in. But, one of the things she kind of talks about in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so kind of years and years down the line, is that to bear a ring of power is to be alone. So I wonder how kind of being a ring bearer, but also realizing that she needs to trust people, let people in, if they'll kind of play off each other at all, or if it's even something that will kind of be brought up this season.
Yeah, and I guess that's where we need to turn to the picture of. There's a couple of different pictures in this, but the one that is really important. There's a beautiful one of her on her horse riding, still wearing the robes she wore at the end of season 1, the green dress in a Region. So that's clearly her. The shot we've seen in the trailer of her and Elrond riding, probably to Lindon with the 3 rings. But the more important picture is the amazing picture of Galadriel standing in a room. And in this room, and this is my jam, to put it bluntly, this is my kind of thing. And the reason is because Galadriel is standing, she's wearing the dress we've seen her and the other shots of her with Nenya. But more importantly, she is standing in this beautiful room, and behind her is this gorgeous map. And it is, you tell me, Anna, is this the most beautiful map we've ever seen? I think this just might be one of the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen in general. Hanging in the Louvre areas, isn't it?
Like the ship, the waves, like the little details of all the kind of little boats dotted around, like the beds. It's so good.
Yeah. So there was a question that I had which isn't really related to any character in particular, but Brent Fisher at Carol Collector said, this will most likely part of the plan already, but I'd really love a detailed recap of all the love the scenery folks are putting into the backgrounds and sets. I feel like there's a lot of lore nerds on that crew making sure we know they know. We're going to talk about it with the Númenor picture. We could talk about it with the description of, and we already have with Celebrimbor's Forge, but this picture. So, let's just talk about some of the stuff in here. One, obviously, the whole map, everywhere it's annotated with place names, is in Elvish with the Tengwar writing system. It is gorgeous. Then you have Arondir standing on Vingalot, which is the boat he sailed to Valinor and then was later propelled into the heavens like a giant guided missile. And of course, in his hands, he's carrying the Silmaril, which is the Silmaril that he and his wife Elwing saved. And it is now, my mum's a bird, my dad's a star. Going back to that old meme. But so the thing is, this map is clearly a tapestry. It's not a painting. It's not a drawing. So just think about that for a second. Then think about the fact of the way they've drawn, of the way they've weaved this, I guess is the way you say, with a tapestry, where it almost looks like Eärendil is coming out of it, giving that sense that he is not in Middle-earth, he is above Middle-earth, looking down on it. Other things to note in here, you have the beautiful waves at the bottom. You have the intricate pattern around the edges, this kind of flower and plant motif with the kind of spirals around it. Then you've got, even the candle holder below, in front of it is amazing, or the lamp on the side. Right, now, the reason I want to bring this picture up is not even really to do with Galadriel. It is because...
I know exactly why you want to talk about it.
It is because, ladies and gentlemen, this is so clearly in Círdan's domain. We are Cír fans, Cír maniacs. We are so close to seeing him. They still haven't given it to us. I can't believe we got a whole Empire feature without meeting him. I'm assuming they're going to give him like a whole interview where we reveal him and we get like 12 pictures of him. I have to believe that. But this is so clearly his. And just to go over the reasons it's his, yes, obviously. And I will be doing a deep dive episode on Círdan once we finally get him revealed. But look at the waves. Círdan, the shipwright, the elf who was not only a mentor to Eärendil, but helped him build Vingalot, the ship he is standing on. Other things to note, this is a map of Middle-earth, which is almost half is just looking at the sea. That's because Círdan is of the coasts. All through his history, he has been Lord of the Havens. He has been one of the Philathrum. Oh, I'm just so excited. Someone, Anna, stop me. I'm just so excited.
No, I see what you mean. And listen, I think, Círdan's never been one of kind of, and listen, don't shoot me when I say this, but I think you know what I mean. He's never been one of the most insanely popular Tolkien characters. But I do appreciate that, I say this like I know what they're going to do, but I'm on your wavelength, no pun intended, wavelength, where I hope where I hope that they kind of do this big reveal and they kind of do a big feature just for Círdan, because I listen, I think he deserves it. He's a canon character and he's a really important one. But just what I took away from this picture really is that one of the arguments that I've never understood about the Rings of Power, like, listen, it's fine if you don't like it, but I hate when people say that the people involved with it clearly don't care about Tolkien or don't care about the lore or the world that they're telling the story of. Because you look at a picture like this and it's like they could easily have not included that tapestry. You know, there could have just been kind of a wall behind her.
Yeah, or
They
just
went
a
out of their
boring
way.
map.
Just a boring map, but they went out of their way to create this with Arondir, a Silmaril, the Tengwa script, like you said, and it's just that it was they didn't need to do that, but it's just the little details like that. Even back in season 1, there were so many details like that, and it's like, how can you look at this and think that the people who made this don't care about Tolkien or care about the story that they're telling? It just baffles me. Well, actually, you know what? The people saying that probably didn't watch those parts. They probably just kind of took the face value and they were like, ugh, they don't care. I'm not going to read any more into that.
Yeah, they said Galadriel and then they switched off. But here's why I think it's really interesting. And I will relate it back to Galadriel, because obviously we were talking about this within the context of Galadriel. The really interesting thing about Círdan, and again, I'll talk about him more in future, is that he is the oldest elf really that's named in the books that we still see in the Second Age and the Third Age. He was one of the first elves to awake at Cuiviénen. He hasn't been to Valinor, which makes him incredibly interesting, but he's one of the elves that doesn't go to Valinor by choice before the First Age, kind of prior to everything that happens with Anyway, if you haven't read the Silmarillion, this is just going to be boring, so I won't go on about it. But the significance is that Círdan is more than Galadriel, more than Gil-galad, well, I shouldn't say Gil-galad, because he and Elrond are some of the younger ones, technically. But to put it this way, Celebrimbor and Galadriel were both born in Valinor. They are both incredibly old. They both lived and saw everything that happened in the First Age. When Galadriel says to Elrond in season 1, "You have not seen what I have seen," well, let me tell you, if Elrond has not seen what Galadriel has seen, Galadriel has not seen what Círdan has seen. He was one of the elves to make the journey, but one of the elves who remained in Middle. I mean, he's just he is an amazing character. I called him once on Twitter the Eternal Sentinel. He has been this watchful guardian in service to the Valar through all the ages of Middle-earth, and I just can't wait to see how he impacts these characters. But anyway, we've been going for a long time, so we shouldn't just talk about this map. But for the person who asked us to just obsess over the scenery, I mean, I think we've said it so many times, but the set design, the production design, and there was even a quote from, I think it was Charlotte Brandstrom, one of the directors, talking about how the move to the UK has really helped them because they've been able to build bigger sets because they have more studio space, basically, at Bray Studios and everywhere else they've been filming in the UK. So she was saying they've basically built 360-degree sets. So when in that scene of Celebrimbor earlier, Empire described, and they're describing it being like a cathedral, I think that's because they built a giant set that they could film from any angle that feels like you're inside a cathedral. I mean, we're not prepared for how amazing the set, and think about how good the sets were in season 1. I don't think we're prepared for how even better they're going to be in season 2.
I think everything about season 2 is just going to be like bigger scale. It's going to be grander. It's just everything we've seen so far, I think, confirms that. And it's, we've got more locations, more characters. It's going to be insane. And I'm very excited.
There wasn't, just sticking with the last of the elves, there wasn't much in the magazine about Elrond, obviously. There's just, to be honest, there hasn't been a lot about Elrond from a substantive point of view yet. We know he's going to be going with Galadriel at first because we've seen from the trailer. We know he's going to be at the battle because we've seen him fully armored. And by the way, within this magazine, we got it sent people on Twitter into, shock is the only way I can describe it. People fainted. People may have died. I haven't checked, but it is entirely possible, of Elrond in battle with this beautiful armor. And if you want to talk more about the production team, I mean, this armor, which has the crest of Gil-galad on where his collarbone is, the breastplate has the 2 trees of Valinor engraved in kind of interlocking silver and gold. That is the most beautiful thing. It's got the feathers on his shoulders as a kind of tribute to his mother. I mean, do you want to say anything about that? I mean, I know there's nothing substantive about Elrond in here, but just that picture.
I mean, I really like that the feathers have been like a recurring thing on his costumes. I mean, we saw it in season one as well, so I like that he's always carrying kind of that part of his mother with him.
Mm.
There's just, I mean, I'm excited that he's going to be given these kind of battle scenes. I mean, we know that going forward, that's like kind of something that he does. I don't think there's much more that I can add that you haven't, but just like the level of detail, the linking of the two trees, like the silver and gold, it's just those tiny little details
Yeah.
that it's so easily missed. But obviously I know what you're like. Every time we get a picture, you're like zooming in like times 500 to every kind of little part of it. So it's just details like that that I think really
Yeah.
make you know that they're kind of doing it as fans of Tolkien for fans of Tolkien.
Yeah, and it's just I've seen other people say this. I think what I appreciate what they're doing with the elven armor in season 2, and it still has. Some people have said it's a massive change from season 1. It's not actually. If you look at what the Eregion guards were wearing in episode 8 of season 1, if you look at what Gil-galad's guards were wearing, it's actually similar. It's slightly different though. One reason for this is obviously when we see that huge amount of elven soldiers, armor that is produced for a mass army is going to look different rather than just for some royal guards. But what I like is that it feels like a middle point between some of the older armor we saw with like Finrod's armor in the First Age and what, I don't, people know my views on not trying to pay too much homage to the Peter Jackson films, but I like that this armor, especially Elrond's, feels like a halfway point between those two, as it should in the Second Age.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I tweeted out the other day that I was like, oh, some of my favorite pieces of armor from the Rings of Power, and I think I included like Arondir's, the kind of
Oh,
wooden
gorgeous.
from
Yeah.
season one, still probably my favorite piece. And I included, Galadriel's, Elrond's, but there were so many people in my replies who were like, oh, so you like the Númenorian armor as well. The Númenorian armor was horrible and terrible. And that was the whole kind of bulk of my replies. And
Yeah.
listen, I don't think that the Númenorian armor was done as well as the elven armor. I don't think it was. But I think that people are way too harsh on it. I mean, they've kept the same one. We've got this picture of Elendil and Miriel, and he's wearing that kind of same armor, and the scales and the netting and everything like that. It all fits into Numenor,
And we talked about this last season, that like Númenor, at least within the show's canon, and kind of based on where the books are as well, at this point they don't really have a need for a standing army wearing heavy
yes,
plate and mail. They're a seafaring civilization. They're not going to be wearing heavy, bulky metal plate armor. They're going to be wearing light armor that you can wear on ships, durable,
yeah.
but and the same with the cavalry. But like you said, we don't need to kind of go over all that again. While we're on Elrond, because he's obviously going to be with Galadriel, and we've seen from the trailer he's in the scene with the Barrow wights. Should we talk about the Barrow wights? Because they obviously got almost a whole page to themselves actually in the books, in the magazine, and I think it was because, well, I think the reason is it's because it's a creature we haven't seen in any other Tolkien adaptation really. In the sense, obviously, we've seen the Nazgul and we saw the Mystics last season, and we actually have an audience question that links the two. So, for those who haven't read the magazine, there's like 5 parts to this. They basically split it down to the idea, the garb, the face, the movement, and the voice. And so they talk about the idea of bringing in this part of Tolkien which just hasn't been seen in an adaptation really before. And they talk about... And let's just briefly touch on the garb, because obviously Anna and I know that there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter about the artistic design. And obviously this all started with the fact that one of the covers for the Empire magazine, which I think was a subscriber-only cover for Empire, had a piece of concept art. And a lot of people looked at that and said, why does this look like they've taken monsters and they've put them in what looks like Eastern or Middle Eastern or South Asian garb, kind of going back to this idea, the problem, which I think is a very valid critique of the Peter Jackson films as well, that they only use Middle Eastern or African or Asian-inspired clothing when it's bad guys. And it kind of, we've talked about this before, but, and it's perfectly fine to have this critique of Tolkien, that he didn't write perfect books. And one of the things that is very questionable about it, and does include racist elements, is this idea of the East and of the East being associated with evil, and even his description of the Haradrim and the Easterlings in the book. There's some stuff in there that is, to put it bluntly, you can very much tell it was written by a man who was born in the 19th century and grew up, while the British Empire was very much still a thing. So obviously people had this negative reaction to the concept art. And then we got the magazine feature, and we got a closer look at a couple of the costumes. We actually got still some more concept art, which is different concept art. So again, we're getting a lot of different looks, and I would say there's not a lot of consistency. So I think this is part of where the critique is coming from, is that we're almost seeing some discontinuity between the concept art to the final piece. So all of that, bear in mind. And as I said earlier, and as I said on Twitter, I think that's a perfectly valid critique. And one thing me and Anna don't want to do is, especially as two white people, sit here and go, oh no, let us tell you how you should feel about it. So to be very clear, I think I can completely see where this critique is coming from. Couple of things I will just add on to it. There's been a bit of misreporting on Twitter about what's actually said in the article. So let me just read what's said about the garb in the article, which is, and when I'm quoting something that someone involved in the show has said, I will say it's a quote. So just bear in mind when I'm not saying that, this is something an Empire writer has written. So the Empire writer says, essentially ghouls dwelling in barrows, brackets tombs. The basic concept of the wights is that they used to be important people. And then we get a quote from Jason Smith, who's the VFX supervisor on the show. And he says, kings, queens, high-ranking officials, every one of them we gave a bit of backstory to. This guy was a soothsayer. This lady was a prophetess. All of them would have been fairly wealthy, so they had red burial robes and were draped in some of their earthly possessions. And then the Empire writer comes back in and says, just because you're a terrifying force from beyond the grave doesn't mean you can rock some bling. And I know a lot of people took issue with that quote because basically saying, again, it's going back to this idea of just treating another culture's, clothing as quote unquote bling. And I just want to be very clear about that is something that the Empire writer has said, not the person involved with the show. And the reason I'm saying this is not to minimize people's critique. As I said on Twitter, I think these critiques are super important, and they're important conversations for people to be able to have in a respectful way. But what I think is important, and we talked about this with the Annatar and Celebrimbor stuff, is not to put words in people's mouths. And that, I think, is important when it comes to people involved with the show. So what the showrunner said is that they're basically meant to be dressed in burial robes and draped in some of their earthly possessions. Now, it is still entirely possible that their influences were Eastern clothing, and there is a really valid critique there about the problematic issues with that. But I think one thing we should be clear about is the showrunners haven't, and the artists involved with the show haven't said what their inspirations are yet, and they haven't given any information on that. Now, that doesn't minimize the critique. I just want to be careful about laying out the facts there. I saw a great thread on Twitter talking about how there may have been influences of the Etruscan burial mounds. So that's another interesting perspective. Again, Anna and I aren't here to talk about our personal opinion on it because, frankly, as two white people from England, we don't necessarily have the most informed viewpoint. And I'm always a big believer, if I'm not well versed in something, if it's not something that could potentially harm me, I'm not the person to tell other people how to feel about it. But I just wanted to give the context. With that said, I think the rest of the article about the Barrow Wights is super encouraging. So, with that critique, not minimized, but just acknowledged, let's talk about some of the other stuff. The prosthetic work on these wights looks fantastic. The performers, they've apparently used a blend of live action and CGI, using dancers and stunt people to get a kind of jerky body motion, which we know they used a ballet dancer in season 1 for one of the orcs to give that really kind of strange movement. And this is the bit that gets me so excited. And Anna, I'll bring you in after I read this part. So this is the bit about the voice. In Tolkien's writings, the wights sing a tune that's moodier than any Morrissey one, sample lyric, cold be hand and heart and bone. Prepare to finally hear it, or a version of it. They're not going to set up a band or anything, says Smith, but if a creature starts softly singing to me with a voice that sounds like dry leaves, that ambiguity is where all the fear is. End quote. The bone-chilling vocals are the final ingredient in a stew of raw terror, other inspirations for which came from dozens of scary movies studied by Smith and his team, including Disney classic The Watcher in the Woods and George C. Scott Chiller, The Changeling. And then Smith continues, little tricks and rules, ways to make the human brain shriek in terror, ways to make our whole existence come into question. It was fun. Anna, as someone who loves horror films, I've got to imagine you're pretty excited about what they're going to do with this.
I'm very excited. I mean, the focus on kind of dance and song it's so good. You know, you've probably watched a load of horror movies as well. I think if you're in kind of a dark forest, it's completely silent. It's very eerie. The last thing that you want to hear is this very soft voice singing in the distance. Listen, singing is not necessarily a bad thing, but in a context like that, and I assume, listen, if Bear McCreary is involved, and they've clearly thought about it in this way, it's going to be probably one of the creepiest things we've ever heard.
I'll be removing that from the playlist, by the way, because I don't want to be having that on my shuffle. Like, if I'm using it to study and that comes on, I do not need that.
I don't think it will be the exact same, but I think it will be sort of reminiscent of the Mystics theme. I don't know if you've kind of listened to it recently, but there's this kind of like chilling, sing-songy, but almost hissing. Yeah, they're kind of hissing, they're kind of chanting. It's really good. I think that it'll be something like that, and it's really it's a scary piece of music to listen to.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that they're bringing in kind of live action performers and dancers. I think that those kind of like really fluid movements along with the singing is just, it's like the perfect combination. And then on top of that, you have the prosthetics, which they look horrifically good.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to your point on the live action performers and my regularly scheduled opportunity to talk bad about the Hobbit films. Listen, I know people think the fight's really cool where Elrond and Saruman at Dol Guldur, fight the ring wraiths. But the problem is when you watch that fight, and it's not your first time watching it in a cinema, it just looks a bit silly because there's no weight to anything. The wraiths are just kind of floating and flying around. And that's what you lose when you don't have any physical performers on set. And so given the fact that Galadriel and her company are going to be fighting these wraiths, I like that they've kept that physical element. And I just love this idea, as Smith says at the start of it, we've seen undead before, but not like this. We're doing a little horror movie in Middle-earth. I mean, the words horror movie and Middle-earth together, yeah. I mean, yes, please inject it.
It reminds me of something that I think Sam Hazeldine said in his article. He said something like,
oh, yeah.
Season 2 starts off almost right away as very bloodthirsty and violent. And I think that in all aspects, in every storyline, they've gone for that very dark, bloody theme straight away, which I think is really cool. And that's why I think it's quite interesting, actually, that they've brought in the Barrow wights in this season. And I actually did want to get your perspective on how they're going to kind of fit that in with the timeline, because we do know that the Barrow wights technically aren't around at this point. But what I was going to say was I think it's very interesting that they have these villains in that are going to be singing as a big part of their characters. And they've also introduced Tom Bombadil, who's going to be singing. So I think that's going to be a really good opportunity for Bear McCreary to do these two kind of themes that will almost be kind of the opposite of each other. So I think that'll be really cool to get.
Well, and we kind of touched on this earlier because you asked me earlier if I thought Bombadil was going to be involved, and I said I didn't, and I think Galadriel's going to solve the issue, and I think this is where we'll see her first use Nenya. Now, Nenya isn't like, I mean, we Tolkien doesn't give a lot of information about the Power of the Rings, but I think we'll see her use it like Frodo uses the file of Galadriel. Basically, I think
it's just kind of this light.
Yeah, I don't think
almost.
I don't think it'll be like in the Battle of the Five Armies where Galadriel sets off a nuke with Nenya and just vaporizes an orc. I don't think we're going to see that. Just a guess, but I think it may be that idea of her capturing the light of Valinor and using it to banish the undead. That's my theory. That's all I've got to go on at this point. I think that is the most likely option.
What if she turns the stone of Nenya and it forms like a lightsaber and she just fights all of the Barrow wights?
Anyway, moving on, we did have a listener question about the wights. So, Shintaro Forever asked, I just noticed that the mystics who were banished by the stranger resemble the concept art of the Barrow wights, especially in their faces and crowns on their heads. Do you think they are the same?
No.
Yeah, I think where we're getting at, and sorry, I never really answered your question about like with the timeline, because obviously we know the Barrow wights in the Third Age, the hobbits come across, they are dead kings and lords who have basically been reanimated by the Witch King, by Angmar himself. But the point when people have said, why are there Barrow wights in the Second Age? The point to me is Sauron is the original necromancer. He is the sorcerer of twisted spirits. And, my obvious answer would be, where do you think the Witch King learnt it from? So my feeling there is that this is, Sauron again. The big theme we've had through all the trailers, all the promotional theory, is evil seeping into the ground of Middle Earth, of Sauron infecting the land. And I think this is going to be another thing of it. Now, again, I've seen people say, because, briefly touching on the costumes again, people saying, part of the issue here with the Eastern-inspired clothing is because they haven't in any way fleshed out Rune yet, we can't tell if this is meant to be like, and therefore I can see why people are bringing up the mystics in this context. Are these meant to be runic kings? I don't think they are, personally. I think they've, again, and again, I'm just going from what the VFX supervisor said here about them being buried in red burial robes. I think these costumes are clearly not meant to be what these people would wear every day. They are meant to be burial robes. So I don't think they're connected to Rune. Again, I'm not in any way countering the kind of critique people have. So no, I don't think they're connected to the mystics, but I think the same power that is, what would you say, driving them may be connected.
I mean, I can see where the parallel came from, so it is a good point, especially when kind of the stranger or Gandalf, whoever he may be, kind of beats them, and for a second they turn into these kind of like skeletal beings. That is an easy parallel to make. So, and I kind of like that. The kind of draw between them, because they are both driven by this kind of horrible, the same magic. So it makes sense that the similarities between them.
Okay, I should say the one thing that, Anna, I know you've been dying to talk about for the last 3 hours, and I've kept putting it off you. So I hand the floor over to you because, of course, one of the images we got before the magazine was released, and he is actually, I know you don't have a copy of the magazine, but I'll show it to you, Anna. Literally, the first page of the feature is Damrod. Wow. There you go. You can see him. I know our audience at home can't, but you know the image I'm talking about. So Anna,
I do.
Anna, talk to us about Adar's new best friend, Damrod the Hill Troll.
Listen, I'm going to start with the fact that we've talked about the VFX and like practical effects. This is just another one where I'm immediately like, he looks incredible. I've got a little picture of him up in front of me here, so I'm looking at him all zoomed in. He looks so cute, but he's so like big and scary, and he's wearing this big like little robe of skulls, which the skulls look tiny in comparison to him, which I think is obviously because he's this huge cave troll, but it's such like a nice detail. He's like got ropes wrapped around his wrist, and he's, I can't talk about him without talking about the fact that he's got a nipple piercing.
I do think I was the first person to tweet about that. I don't know what that says about me, but
yeah, I was gonna say, like, why was that the picture you decided to really zoom in on?
Listen, no, someone said like, oh, I see you zooming in on his chest, and can I just say, I've just got very good eyesight. I spotted it. I didn't even need to zoom in. I was just like, what's that on his nipple? And I zoomed in, and he's got like a dagger or something through his nipple as a kind of rudimentary nipple piercing. It's not that I was looking at his chesticles. I was just, I have no explanation. I just saw it. I'm eagle-eyed. I'm an elf.
I think he looks great, and I also really love it because, listen, I have no expectations that he's going to be this big recurring character, but I do love it when they give names to the villains that we see like a few times, because, especially if he's kind of someone who's working with Adar, it goes into that humanization. Like, they have names, they have personalities, stuff like that. But he also, I think I tweeted about this just after we got the picture, he kind of reminds me of that like middle management orc from the Two Towers who kind of is very firm with Saruman about the fact that they don't have enough fuel, they don't have enough time to arm all of the orcs. That's what I want from Damrod.
Well, I think the first thing I tweeted out was I said something along the lines of, I love how absolutely fed up he looks at having been recruited again. I said on Twitter, he looks like he's just miserable about the fact there's a new Dark Lord and he's going to have to go to work at the murder factory again. And, that there's not going to be proper union protection. He's not going to get fair pay. He's not going to get a good break. He's not going to get compensation. And I know people will say, oh, Harry, going to work at the murder factory, he's got a belt full of skulls. Why would he care? Listen, there is a difference between pursuing murder as a passion and a hobby and being forced by, the kind of industrial machinery to do it for a living. That's all I'll say. But yeah, let me just read, because it is a very funny bit they've put about him. So they've said, interesting new recruit in the gargantuan form of Damrod the Hill Troll, eater of dragon bones. As McKay describes him, and this point's funny, Damrod is voiced by Benjamin Walker, who also plays Elven King Gil-galad, and, says McKay, was inspired in part by Mike in Breaking Bad in Better Call Saul, if you look at the way he moves and his casual sense of strength. So, I cannot wait to see. Listen, I haven't really said this on Twitter, but it goes back to our earlier conversation about accents. Let Benjamin Walker just do his normal American accent for Damrod. Just let him be American. We've got too many Cockney trolls. Give me just an American troll.
See, I think they should kind of go the complete opposite route and let him do the exact same tone and inflection that he does for Gil-galad, and just do that for Damrod with no explanation. Everyone just accepts it.
You just think he should turn to Adar and go, "Hope is never mere, Adar, even when it is me." I think
he should. Yeah, just give him the exact same lines, everything. It's just... But yeah, I think I love it when any film, but especially Tolkien ones, do the kind of one actor for two roles. Obviously the big one is John Rhys-Davies, who played Gimli and also did the voice for Treebeard. And I think it's really fun. I think I'm really excited to see how Benjamin kind of takes on a villainous role as well as playing Gil-galad at the same time. So I think I'm so excited for him.
Okay, and then the last thing I think we'll discuss about the Empire feature, because we have now almost been going for 4 hours. Neither of us have eaten dinner, I'm sure, and I'm going to spend all of tomorrow editing this, so yay. Okay, so from Númenor, we got very little, and we've had very little. However, I just want to remind people, once again, going back to this point about marketing, in Season 1, we didn't see anything, apart from the brief shots we got in the very first Super Bowl trailer. We got nothing about Númenor until the day before, or the day of the second teaser trailer, which was I think it was July 14th. So, don't be that concerned we haven't seen much of Númenor or Rhûn yet. There's still, as I said the other day, there's still a couple of months to go. But what we do get is this beautiful shot of Miriel and Elendil. As you said, Elendil's wearing his kind of expeditionary white scale armor, and Miriel is wearing a beautiful, what looks like kind of dark navy, royal blue, what to me looks like a morning gown, complete with a kind of what do you call that? A veil over her head. Is that the
yeah?
And it's a real, even though the picture, you can't see it that well, it's a beautiful dress, and they're standing in what we assume to be her father's tomb. They're standing over this sarcophagus with this likeness of Tar Palantir there, which, as we all remember, Eärien was actually being, she was one of the architects who was brought in to take the likeness of the king before he died. Now, the way I'll cue up this discussion, because there's nothing really in the article about them, our good friend Emily, at Moonlarking on Twitter, said, talk about why Elendil's got his battle armor on in that one still, and where you think that scene takes place in the season. And as I said to Emily on Twitter, and as I'll say to you now, because obviously I've been given leaks about Númenor, which I've talked about some of them in the past, I don't really want to speculate too much. So I'll just throw it over to you, Anna. Why's Elendil still got his armor on, and where do you think this takes place in the season?
So I think, for obvious reasons, this is going to be quite early on in the season. When they get back to Númenor, one of the first things they hear is that Miriel's father has died. So if she's still in these kind of mourning clothes, and listen, I'm not saying that there's kind of a time period where she has to stop mourning, but
formal mourning.
Formal mourning would take place kind of in the days, weeks after he's died. So I think this will be quite early on. As for why Elendil's wearing his armor, I'm not too sure. In Season 1, we did see that a lot of the time he was kind of around Númenor. He was wearing kind of this armor of some sort. I think it was his sea god uniform as opposed to the kind of the combat armor or whatever. But he might be acting as some sort of kind of, I don't want to say bodyguard, but some sort of kind of protection for Miriel. So it would make sense for him to be kind of ready for threats, ready for combat, anything like that. So that's probably why he's in there, at least in my mind. He's even the way he's stood behind her with his hand on his sword. He looks like he's ready, even just in this tomb, to kind of jump into action to defend her. So if they went down the route of him as her kind of protector this season, it would make sense for me.
Yeah, and I think, again, without going into anything I might have heard, I think people are spot on to assume this is early in the season. Like you said, the king died while Miriel and Elendil were on their way back from Middle-earth. We don't know how much time has passed on that voyage. Obviously, again, going back to that point about TV shows, time isn't the same as time you see in an episode. So he could have been dead for days before they got back, or it could have been, who knows? And I think the reason Elendil's still in his eye, that's an interesting one. Again, without getting into any kind of spoiler territory or leak territory, I think part of this is going to be about the fact that it's early on in the season, so they've just got back from the expedition. They are still in that expedition mindset. And remember, Miriel said at the end of season 1 to Galadriel, she intended to return. So in Elendil's mind, he might think, well, this expedition hasn't been disbanded. We've just come back, and then we're going to go again. Whether that happens or not, obviously, might depend more on the political situation in Númenor. But yes, I think this could be very early on in the season. Very, very early on would be my guess. Yeah.
It wouldn't shock me if it was the first or second episode.
Yeah. It wouldn't. I don't think anyone should be surprised if this is one of the first scenes we see in Númenor. I think that would make complete sense. Okay. That's kind of everything I have to say about the Empire feature. There was a little bits in Stranger about there, but we didn't get anything substantial. Like I said, not much about Elrond's journey, nothing about Círdan really, and nothing really about the Númenor team. I suspect, like we got for season 1, we'll get a separate. I can't remember which magazine it was. It wasn't Total Film. I think it was Entertainment Weekly did the Númenor feature last time, so maybe they'll get it again. I think we'll get that in the coming weeks. Anna, anything else in the Empire feature we haven't touched on that you'd like to?
No, actually, the only other thing I made a note on was it was talking about the fact that Sauron has gone from this Halbrand form to Annatar, and one of the showrunners, I can't remember which one, but one of the showrunners says, there's a reason that Halbrand was so charming, and weirdly, when he's as Annatar, you will still like him. And I was like, still? Are you assuming that everybody liked him as Halbrand?
No, but okay, you have very much misrepresented. I'm going to read that quote out because Anna is letting her Halbrand bias out, and so now I am going to have to get the damn magazine open. So, let's see.
Listen, I was secondhand reading this magazine from your thread, so...
Yeah, well, if you'd just gone to W.H. Smith's, you could have just got one for yourself. Where is it? I know I had part of the quote in my thread, but I just want to try and... Okay, yeah, here it is. Here's the quote. So this is Patrick McKay talking about it. He said, talking about Sauron, and specifically they were talking about why they cast Charlie Vickers, because they basically said, we were initially looking at Charlie Vickers for Elrond, and then they found Robert Aramayo and were like, Robert Aramayo's. So I'll read that full bit, just because obviously I didn't put that in the thread. So here we go. So was it his dark, brooding looks, or perhaps a slight edginess to his demeanour that made the showrunners pluck him from relative obscurity to play Tolkien's biggest bad? Quite the opposite. In fact, Vickers had originally auditioned for the role of Elrond. Charlie's such a lovely, delightful person that you feel a sense of warmth and light about him, says Payne. That's something we were looking for in the Elrond character. But after they settled on Robert Aramayo for the half-elven diplomat, he and McKay couldn't get Vickers out of their heads. They kept thinking, where does he fit? It was J.A. Bayona, director of Season 1's first 2 episodes, who suggested Vickers would be good for Sauron. And then McKay continues, our eyes lit up like a pinball machine. We said, now his charm and warmth are a weapon. If this works, it will pay dividends down the road. When he goes dark, you will weirdly still like him and want to go on his journey, even though the things he's doing are repellent to you. I think the results speak for themselves in Season 2. So...
I never knew that he auditioned to be Elrond first.
I don't know if that's been revealed before. I know
really
some people,
interesting.
it's often the way with these productions that people audition for one character and end up as another. That's not uncommon. But like they say, it's because he's got that warmth as a person. There's also a great quote from Charlotte Brandstrom who says, talking about his performance in season 2, Charlie's so normal in real life, and then he becomes so Machiavellian, so evil, so cruel. With just a small look, he's just incredible. I mean, that's got me excited.
Can I just say that I'm sorry, I'm reading your thread at the moment. You spelled the word cruel wrong.
If I was allowed to swear on this podcast, I wouldn't say FYI to you, but I would say something beginning with F. But there was an interesting bit I didn't put in the thread, and we don't need to talk about this too much because we've been going for like 4 hours. But just talking about Sauron and Adar, Payne says, so he's talking about Sauron returning to Mordor, and he says, Sauron has nothing except for his own cunning and wit. Which, again, makes me think that whatever's going on with Adar is definitely going to be manipulation-based. So, that's the end of the Empire. We've got a couple more quick audience questions to get through, and then we can finish. You got time for that, Anna?
I do.
Okay, great. So we've gone through all the stuff. Ensign GC's question about the map. We talked about the map, so hopefully we gave you, and you said as extensive as possible. Listen, we didn't go through and translate all the place names, but I'm sure someone on Twitter will have gone through. But it's just places like the Bay of Belfast. It is a real map. It's got the right names on there. It's just in Elvish. Although one thing I did think was interesting on the map as well, which I didn't mention earlier, in the sea, there's 2 things which are interesting. One, they've got pictures of birds. Obviously, that is very relevant to both Eärendil and just the elves in general, the idea of the gulls calling to them. And then the second thing is there are boats in the sea, and some of them are on fire and burning, which, if you know the history of the First Age, very funny.
The first thing I noticed was like the burning ship, and I was like, surely not.
It's very funny that Círdan, who is very much not of the Noldor, very much not of those who travel to Valinor, very telling that he was like, just want to remind everyone what some of our kin were up to in the First Age, and I'm not them. James Verse also asked, I'd love some discussion about the Sack of Region. We didn't get too much into it today, but we'll talk about more of that in future. And it's hard to talk about without just either wildly speculating or just spoiling it. And it's very difficult to do. But like I said, I am planning on having a guest on to talk about it just from a kind of purely strategic point of view. We've talked about Sauron Annatar's accent, Brent Fisher's question about the scenery. I mean, sorry, just to return to that Númenor picture, I tweeted about this the other day, but that set for the tomb, I mean, talking about the idea Tolkien had of, I put it on Twitter the other day, this idea that men began to build tombs, bigger than their homes, and the names of the dead. This whole idea, it's central to Númenor's theme of venerating the dead and becoming obsessed with death and becoming obsessed with fending off mortality. So, and there's a great thing in that set where they have carved into the pillars and the corners of Tar Palantir's sarcophagus. They have Uinen, who we saw the statue of in the Númenor prison cell, who's the Maiar who protects the mariners. So I think it's lovely they've put her in there as well. Okay, our last 2 questions, which are just about broad things. So, Mr. Shadowfax at Papa Template on Twitter said, I feel like there's been zero discussion or curiosity about Celeborn anymore since all these first looks came out. They are really leaving us hanging in suspense of his character reveal. My big question is, how far into the season do we think it'll be till he's introduced?
I'm not going to lie, I completely forgot about Celeborn until right then.
Listen, as I've always said, I would be quite happy to forget about Celeborn.
You know what? Actually, I did think about him the other day, and it made me laugh because I think it was Tea with Tolkien said after I tweeted about Sauron kind of stealing Galadriel's aesthetic in that the Empire cover where he's wearing this kind of silver robe and he's got the white hair, and Tea with Tolkien replied and was like, why does he look exactly like Celeborn did in the Peter Jackson films? And I was like, oh my god, he does.
Really does.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think I was like Team Celeborn when I thought he was going to be in the show, because I think I was just so anti-Halbrand that it drove me to the other side. But I don't think this season needs Celeborn at all. I think at this point, from what we've learned about the season so far, it would be way too much to introduce another canon character, one so important to Galadriel's life as well. I don't think he's needed in this season anymore, and I can't imagine that he'd still be kept a secret now if he was going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe we're all being bamboozled and he will appear.
Maybe Sauron is Celebrimbor. Maybe Sauron is Celeborn.
Anna,
That's the next reveal.
Don't say that. You know what that'll do to the shipping wars in our community. We don't need that. We don't need that. No.
No, we don't.
I'll answer this as well. Yeah, I think there is a good chance he doesn't appear. And like Anna said, we discussed this on our last episode. We can see a valid reason for not including him in the season, even though I know people will be disappointed. But I go back to that point of like, this is the story the showrunners have decided to tell. And if they were deciding to tell a different story, then Celeborn would have appeared in season 1. But they're not, so he isn't. Do I think he'll appear in season 2? I think the odds are against. However, what I will say is a note of hope for the Celeborn fans. I would be surprised if we don't get some indication this season of where he is or where he's been. Because I think even if he doesn't appear this season and he's not going to appear till season 3, I would be shocked if they're not setting that up to be a big plot point in season 3 post Eregion. So
yeah, so we might get like a few nods to him, a little bit of a teaser for season 3 maybe, but he doesn't seem relevant to the story at this point in time to kind of put him in.
Can you imagine if like the last, because we've said we have no idea what the Stranger and Nori are doing this season in Rune. Can you imagine if their last scene in Rune is like they're wandering through Rune and they come across, a lone elf sitting by a campfire and he, they say, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Oh, I've been wandering for many, blah, 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 blah." And then literally the last shot is Nori saying, "And what's your name?" And he goes, "Teleporno." And then just cut to black.
I think they should have the very final scene of the show be Elrond kind of go into a room where Galadriel is sat and he does the kind of Star Wars sequel line of somehow Celeborn has returned. And that's it.
Cut to black. Okay, and then our last question comes from, this is our last question. I think have we covered all the other ones? Yes, we have covered all the other ones. So our last question of the day, and this is just a little fun one. Yeah, so Olaf Hisborg says, question, possible actors to portray OG Sauron Myron. So I think this comes from, there's been some rumors, I think it might have been from Fellowship of Fans or other sites that do leaks. So obviously none of this has been confirmed. So I know we usually like to avoid this stuff. But so if in the prologue we do get a view of the original Sauron, do we have a view on who might play him? To be honest, I would have to get the list of the new cast up. I mean, so it's not Rory Kinnear, obviously, because he's been cast. It's not Callum Lynch, because we saw him in the trailer as one of the elves. It's obviously not Selena Nutlow. It's not Amelia Kenworthy.
There was this whole rumor that was kind of debunked after the fact that it was going to be Garvey who played just the Sauron in his Annatar form. Obviously, we know now that it's Charlie Vickers, but maybe if there was kind of this prequely flashback to the Sauron, it would be him. But I don't know. I believe that they're just going to stick with Charlie.
Yeah, I think they might do. I know people have been saying like, oh, because people have reported, it's like it may just again be Charlie, but just with different prosthetics, different costume, different hair. Like, I'm coming around to the idea that that's what they may have done. Now, seeing as we've been asked the question, I'll just list the people it could be of the new cast. So, could be Gabriel Akaduke, could be Oliver Alvin Wilson, could be Zait Sator, not Stuart Bowman because he's. I know that he's not. I know he's playing someone else. Gavi Singh Chariot, like you said, I don't think so because I think like the fact that the people who leaked that and then came out and said, no, actually, we were wrong. I think if it turned out he was playing OG Sauron, they would have just said that. William Chubb, no, he is confirmed Númenor. Ben Daniels could be, but I don't think you get an actor of Ben Daniels' quality to come and play a prologue scene. Also,
I'm a Ben Daniels Círdan truther. I think you might be on the same.
Yeah, I mean, just from that, just because we saw that hand in the trailer, and, you know, the people with weaponized mental illness have been doing hand comparisons with Ben Daniels, and they've decided it is Ben's hand. So, listen, like I say, I always trust people with that particular brand of mental illness to be right about these things. Kevin Eldon, no, that is definitely not Sauron. Sam Hazeldine, no, that's Adar. Kieran Hines, no, too big an actor. Will Keane, no, he is. We've seen him in the trailer and behind the scenes. He is an ally of Farazon. Amelia Kenworthy, no. Rory Kinnear is of course Jolly Tom. Or who knows? Maybe Tom Bombadil is Sauron. Selena Lowe, no. We've seen her as an elf. Cam Lynch, likewise. Tanya Moody, we still don't know who she's playing, so that one's still very interesting. Naya Tal is obviously Estrid. Nicholas Woodison, we don't know who's playing, but obviously he's a man of more advanced years, so I don't suspect he's playing OG.
This is why a Hans poster thing would have been really good, because we could
fun.
Speculate a tiny bit more on who's who.
Exactly. I still maintain they should have done the hands posters. So of all of these, if I had to guess, if it's not Charlie, then I guess the most likely options are either Gabriel, Oliver, or Zayt Sator. So any of those three could be him. But again, although I think one of those we have actually seen in Galadriel's company. I can't remember which one it was. So no, listen, I'm with you. I think it's most likely just going to be Charlie in different makeup, prosthetics, wig. But who knows? And with that, my God, we have been recording for 3 hours and 50 minutes. People may not realize this.
Why do we always do this?
Do you know the funny thing is, listeners, and hopefully I'll be able to edit this down a lot, but probably not. It'll probably still be like 3.5 hours. Before we started recording, Anna said to me, and you know, not for once, as always, Anna was very wise about this. I wasn't. Anna said, Harry, do we have a plan for today, like of the time we want to keep it under, you know, or the maximum amount of time we want to speak? And I said, you know, we're just recapping the news and recapping the promo and updates. I don't think we'll be talking about it for that long. I mean, we're only going to spend like 10 minutes on Tom Bombadil and like not much on, you know, the others. So I think we'll be fine. And Anna went, yeah, no, you're probably right. And here we are. It is 20 to 9 in the evening. I still haven't eaten dinner. And
you know what's quite funny is that you talk about kind of the specific brand of mental illness that goes into like zooming in on the hand.
Yeah.
The hand from the trailer and comparing it to other hands.
Yeah.
What would you call this one where we spend 4 hours talking about 5 magazine articles?
I would say it's not even a very interesting form of mental illness. I think neither of us get out enough. I think neither of us, you know, like I think neither of us touch the right amount of grass, and so we simply don't talk to enough people, and so we have all this leftover yapping energy that has just been stored up over the week. And I mean, admittedly, we haven't had one of these podcasts for like, what is it, like a month and a half? So, you know.
I know we did have to have that month away from talking after like the 7 hours we did on the trailer. So we might just need a few weeks after this to...
Yeah, well, just remember Comic-Con's coming in. There'll be a trailer with that, so we'll be doing another one in about 2 weeks' time or less.
I actually want to do a space soon as well, and you know what I'm like, I'll rope you into that.
No, but we did that last time, didn't we, for the last trailer? We did a space the day the trailer was released, and then a few days later, once we'd had some time to think, we did our proper podcast. So we'll do that again. So for any listeners who are still somehow listening near the 4-hour mark, you can look forward to that, I guess. And guys, I promise, once we get closer to the season, I will try and go back to the daily or, you know, every couple of days format where they're like 15 minutes long. But until then, you just have to deal with me and Anna, like, you know, not being cool enough to talk to other people. So we have to spend 4 hours talking to each other.
You know, what's quite funny is my housemates obviously like hear me recording these episodes and they hear me talk for hours and hours.
Yeah.
And they asked about the podcast one day because they're not like Tolkien fans. And I was like, oh, it's the Daily Rings of Power. And they were like, he does that every day. I was like, no, don't worry.
No, he once did. And that was when he was smart and was like, I could just do 10 minutes a day. And now he's like, what if every month or so, I spend 4 hours and then I, like, just to give listeners an idea, because my initial aim was to release this on Monday. Maybe it'll come out on Tuesday instead. If that happens, guys, the reason is because for every hour of like recording I do, it takes about twice as long to edit this. So I've got about 8 hours of editing ahead of me and I have a day job. So
Yeah, listen, I get the easy end of this straw. Harry literally sends me a list of everything he wants me to come and talk about. And then as soon as we're done recording, I'm like, okay, let me know when it's released. Bye.
Exactly. That's the next time I hear from Anna. And the funny thing is, like, I text. We will wrap up soon, guys. Sorry, I don't know why you're listening at this point. I might just cut all this bit out because honestly, this is just Lizzie showing. But the funny thing is that I hadn't recorded an episode for weeks because what I did in season 1 was when an article came out, I would read it. The next day, I would write up a script and I would record a 15 to 20 minute podcast talking about it. To be clear, for the last few weeks, I've been going through some stuff in my personal life, so I haven't had the time or energy to do that. But the point is, I messaged Anna earlier this week and I said, do you want to... I'm really lazy. I can't be bothered to write a script to cover all this news. So do you just want to come on and like be my guest and we'll just talk about all the news we missed? And you were like, yeah, absolutely. And there I was thinking like, oh, this will be easier. I don't have to write a script. I don't have to do it like that. All I've ended up doing is created 4 hours of audio for me to edit. So, right.
I mean, yeah, I'm like a blessing and a curse because I will come on and talk about absolutely anything with you, but we will talk for about 5 hours straight with no breaks. So,
yeah. Well, on that note, I mean, if any of you have listened all the way through, thank you to you for your own mental illness as well. We're a community of of mental health professionals here in the sense that we've all got mental health problems and we're professionally not dealing with it. But with that said, Anna, as always, I have to devote a massive thanks to you for coming on. As much as we joke about it, it is always a pleasure. And as always, there's literally no one else I would rather spend 4 hours chatting nonsense about Lord of the Rings with. So thank you so much. And of course...
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do expect that that's used on me every time now that I appear on here. But thank you. I also agree. There's probably no one else that I could talk about the Rings of Power with for 4 hours straight. Probably because no sane person would talk about the Rings of Power for 4 hours straight. But yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a really good discussion. I think with the magazine articles, it's hard to realize how much content we are given sometimes. So to sit down and just kind of talk through it is really nice. And it gets me very excited. You know, it's less than 2 months now until the new season.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for us to see new trailers and just kind of watch the new show together. It's going to be amazing.
It is. It's going to be amazing. Well, Anna, thank you so much. We will probably be back, given when Comic-Con is, we will probably be back analysing the next trailer in a few weeks. So, with all that said, thank you, Anna, once again, and off to the outro we go. And that, dear listeners, is the end of today's discussion with Anna. For the third time in as many episodes, I once again have to give my admiration and appreciation to any of you who survived all 3.5 hours of that conversation. As you can probably tell, it was yet another example of Anna and I lacking any ability to be concise. However, I hope that some of you listeners are like me and enjoy this longer format rather than the endless tedium of TikTok videos and bite-sized content. As I mentioned before the episode, we had a huge number of new articles drop yesterday, and so I will be tackling these in an episode that I'll aim to deliver into your podcast feeds by next Monday. It will likely just be a solo episode, me on my own without a guest, as that way I won't end up with another 4 hours of recording to edit. As you will have also heard during our discussion, I am still planning to bring on other guests, many of whom have been waiting since I first invited them before Season 1 even aired, to join me and discuss different aspects of the coming season. If you're somehow new to this podcast, make sure you subscribe on whichever podcast platform you prefer so that you never miss an episode. As always, I would love to continue the discussion on Twitter, where you can find me at Daily Rings of Power. But for today, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back very soon with more discussion of the latest news on the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Namarie.